Hello everyone and welcome to the Unity 101 course brought to you by 3dbuzz.com. My name is Jason Busby and I will be joining along with Mr. Gavin here in the near future, whenever he gets internet back, with your lead instructor, Mr. Nelson Lakay. Say hello, Nelson.
Hey.
All right. Ooh, listen to the enthusiasm. You have it tonight. Awesome. So this Unity 101 course, it's an interesting course, and I need to take a moment to explain to you what this course is, just to make sure some of you guys don't have a minor stroke when we start teaching things tonight. So this is a game design course using Unity 101. What version are you currently running, Nelson? 3.5 point something?
Yeah, I'm doing the latest one that was released, I think, last week, 3F3, something like that, 3.5, 3F3, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Perfect. Now, this class is not about spending a whole bunch of time going around the UI and getting you familiar with every single feature that's available inside Unity, Unity being an editor. This class is more about game design. We're going to be getting in and we're going to be doing some coding. We're going to be doing a lot of coding before this class is over with. Now, if I have people in this class right now that are thinking, oh, dear heavens, I don't know how to program, that's okay. We have so much code related videos on 3dbuzz and past and currently active C# programming courses that are going on. We encourage you to drop by at any point, join into those classes, to watch past videos, and we will be doing open office hours for our Unity course. So for those of you that are having trouble and you'd like to sit in with those, it's not exactly one-on-one, but it's kind of like one-on-one. It's just that everyone else that's in gets to watch as well. But we are able to take control of your screen and point out problems or help you get over humps that you may be running into. So if you are stoked about learning Unity, and you're excited about getting into game design, but you don't have a coding background, please don't panic and run from the building right now. We want you to stay calm, and it'll be a little bit more challenging. That's for sure. But as long as you have faith in us, we'll have faith in you. You're just going to have to put forth the effort to make sure that you get this stuff. But we will work with you. So it is a 101 class. I'm just pointing that out because tonight we're going to go through the construction of a very simple game, but pretty much all of the game. And it will involve some coding and, of course, working with Unity. And then we're going to begin working on much more complex things starting next week. So I don't want anyone to have a heart attack. The real first homework assignment that you're going to have tonight, I know at least half of you guys, if not more, in this class already, and a lot of you have already done this, so your first week's assignment is going to be pretty easy. But for those of you that have not gone through our fundamental videos, these are the videos that talk about the UI and all of the panels. Even though Nelson will give you a quick rundown here in just a few minutes, you'll find a tremendous amount of detail in these videos. I'm going to post the link over right now into BuzzNet. These are completely downloadable. You can put them on your iPad or whatever type of tablet you may have, or your PC or whatever, and watch those. At least watch enough of them to be familiar with moving around the interface and working with the with game objects and components. This is extremely important. Nelson and I talked about the 101 class. The one thing I did not want to do was to spend the first 6 weeks of the 101 class repeating what we've already recorded and put out there for you guys to download and take home with you. That would be dumb. It would kind of be a waste of time. I mean, yes, there are people that get a little lazy and don't want to watch videos, and maybe they're more excited about participating in a live class going over that stuff. But too bad! Watch those videos, darn it, because this is going to allow us to go forward and build upon that stuff. So you will get some of the extreme basics tonight. But like I said, we are going to be moving forward and digging in a little bit deeper. So you can kind of look at the videos as being like 101A, and starting tonight, ladies and gentlemen, 101B, if you want to. So that's really important. Homework, Gavin's internet happened to explode about 30 minutes before class started. Gavin is the TA, a teaching assistant that's in charge of grading all homework and acting as a liaison between Nelson, myself, and students. He's not here, which is very unusual because Gavin is always in our classes. But like I said, his internet connection exploded. He ended up having to send me what's probably going to equate to a $20 text from the UK letting me know. So you guys will get the opportunity to meet him probably in open office hours, which will take place, I'm pretty sure, next Wednesday, though we will let you guys know. That's generally when we have them. So, Nelson, is there anything else you want to add to this?
No.
Only big thing I've got is I want to challenge every single one of you guys to stick with this class, okay? Let's keep this excitement going. There's a lot of you in here right now, and I'm really excited about that. I just don't want to see this class dwindle down because half of you guys run off going, it's too hard. Let's make it work. I want to see a Unity 102, 103, 104. I want to see a 201. I want to get into some of the really awesome things that Nelson and I have been doing with private students that I've been thinking would be so exciting to share with all of our regular member sponsors over at 3D Buzz. So the big thing is we just got to make sure the excitement keeps going. All right, so with that, let me go ahead and hand it on over to Nelson. Oh, wait a minute, my bad. I do want to make this a point real quick, and that is as far as the recording goes, all of the videos that, well, all the classes are recorded in the video form. Those videos are posted on 3D Buzz. We try to get them up relatively fast. You know, I mean, generally when I'm recording, it's that night. When Nelson's recording, it's what, Nelson? Soon?
It gets done.
It gets done. So I'm just letting you guys know, if you have to leave early, we understand. Don't stress. Don't feel like you've got to, scream at everyone and say, hey, I'm leaving. Is everything going to be okay? Yeah, it's going to be just fine. Just go ahead and go. And you can watch the video once the video is posted. It is very important, though, that if you are going for a certificate in the class, that you need to make sure that you attend at least 50% of the classes. That does not mean that you have to stay from the start to the end. I know many of you are on different time zones than us, almost all of you. And for some of you right now, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Completely understand. Just try to make it a point to make sure you put in some time in at least 50% of the classes. This is a 6-week class, so your efforts aren't that extreme. You just need to participate in 3 classes. Okay? All right, and let me check real quick. Questions before I go ahead and hand it back over. We do have a questions panel. There are a lot of people in BuzzNet right now. A lot of people. Make sure questions that you want to get answered by us are placed over in the questions panel in the webinar. This is very important. Feel free to post questions over in BuzzNet. Those questions, we'll answer them if we happen to see them. But as you can already see, there's a lot of stuff that's scrolling by, and because of that, we cannot focus on BuzzNet constantly. So make sure you put your questions over in the questions panel. And questions that you place over in BuzzNet, you guys are more than welcome to chat amongst yourselves, and, for those of you that have the answers, answer them there. So real quick, I'm looking down the BuzzNet or the webinar question panel right now. Let's see. How experienced do you have to be with C# to be able to implement it into Unity in these lessons? Jack, we're not going to be getting into any complex design patterns or anything like that in the 101 class. It's going to be kept relatively simple. So as long as you have a little bit of experience, you should be fine. If you have no coding experience whatsoever, it may be a little bit of a struggle, but I encourage you not to throw in your hat and give up. We'll work with you. Let's see, moving on down from there. Cloudy and 60 in Alaska. Thanks, Craig. Glad to know. Is this going to be the same as the tutorials? Ryan, thanks for a lot. I have already answered that one. No. We have these classes in video to see again if we need to. Yes, they will be posted. This is my first live webinar. Do we need to click that little blue participate button in the top right of BuzzNet? Ooh, that's a very good question, Jack. Everybody, find the participate button. Click it. Clicky, clicky, click. Oh, look at that. People can follow instructions. Holy crap, look at that, Nelson. That's more people following instructions than what I'm used to. Okay, so we've got a few people, like Matt. Come on, Matt, click the button. There we go. Blind Rob, almost everyone. Here's how this works. Once you click participate, you'll notice your top changes. You have a not ready, 1 minute, and ready. From time to time, we will be asking you guys to follow along with something that we are doing. Basically, Nelson or myself will reset the ready checks, and then you start working on stuff. Once you get it complete, whatever it is that we're asking for, just simply click on ready. That indicates to us that you're done. And we never wait for every single person to finish, for the simple fact that, sometimes there are people that are struggling or slow. We look for about 80 to 90% of the people to complete, and then we will move on. Though we will be checking to say, hey, are you having any troubles, or take a look, this is how it needs to be done. We will, from time to time, also ask for you to click the 1 minute. That basically says, hey, I need 1 more minute. If we're not sure, if we've got people that have gone away from computer and we're not quite at 80%, but it feels like it's been an unusually long amount of time. So that's kind of how that works. Okay? So I think that is everything. I'm just scanning down through. Kobe asks, is it going to be a more advanced space shooter than the last? Yes, it will be. Is BuzzNet frozen? No, I'm watching BuzzNet scroll by with all sorts of people talking in it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to you, Nelson.
Alrighty. There were a few more questions, though.
Yeah, and we can answer these real quick, but then we'll just basically jump back over and answer questions after we get to a point where that's feels appropriate, because we need to get class going. But let's see, what else do we have pop up? I heard that Unity is really good for MMOs. Is it better for MMOs than UDK? For MMOs, yeah, I would definitely think so. Go ahead. What do you have to say?
Well, with UDK, you are relatively limited as far as what language you can use to work with it. Obviously,
say that again, Nelson. You cut out for a second.
With UDK, you're pretty limited with what languages you can use to express your code. So obviously, you'd be forced to use UScript, which is. Hey
Nelson, I think your mic is acting up again.
Test 1 2 3.
You guys can hear him just fine? Oh, lovely. You can hear him? Oh, wow, I've lost the mic.
Okay, so anyway, back to the question. With UDK, obviously you're limited with UScript being the language that you use to express your game logic. Not only that, UDK is more... it's more appropriate for more first-person shooter-style games than Unity. There's a lot of differences between UDK and Unity. UDK is a lot more opinionated than Unity. With Unity, you have a lot more flexibility in how you can express stuff, although that's not saying that Unity will force you to do stuff in a certain way from time to time. So I would say for anything that really isn't a first-person shooter, anything that has a large amount of custom code and custom logic that you need to express, I would be tempted to go with Unity over UDK for those reasons. Did you hear any of that, Jason?
I heard all of that.
Okay.
Very good. And I concur. As a matter of fact, you want to go ahead and read on down the last few?
Yeah, did someone change with needing a webinar password? Citrix did. Until further notice, there won't be passwords on the webinars.
Yeah, on some of the webinars. It's funny how it works because we're using two different webinar accounts. They're migrating over to what they're calling the new global system. Currently, passwords are not available in the new global system. They will be re-implemented soon. Once they are re-implemented, you'll need to make sure within 5 minutes of the start of each class to grab the password from the calendar system. That's also an important reason why you need to make sure that you're actually logged into BuzzNet, because we have a scanner that's going to scan down through everyone. And for those people that ended up with the link but are not member sponsors, they get banned. That's why it's pretty important.
Is it overkill to create a point-and-click game in Unity? Not necessarily. There are things within Unity that are nice, but when you start removing the things in Unity that it does for you, then using Unity becomes less of an appropriate option if you're just going to use the bare minimum of the package itself and ignore everything else. So for a point-and-click game, I would say that there's a lot of stuff in Unity that would aid you in developing that. If you can answer in simple terms, does UDK offer anything that Unity does not? Not to my knowledge. other than it is very opinionated towards a first-person shooter game. So you're going to have a lot of stuff taken care of for you if that's what you're trying to build. Rather than Unity, which is geared towards, well, a variety of different genres of games, because it's less opinionated.
I mean, if you're a one-man team or even a very small team, I find Unity much faster to develop in. And, of course, I like the idea of being able to get a product out on the market faster, but that's just me. I did see something else just scroll by on BuzzNet a second ago, and Musru pointed out, and it is a very good thing to let you guys know, and that is we have to put a time in for webinars as for how long we expect them to go. So I always simply put 2 hours in.
Looks like you put 1 hour in this time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a new system, so there's no telling how they, if there's a bug on their end. But I generally put 2 hours in, but that time doesn't mean anything because we do record these videos and we make them available to you again on 3D Buzz. So I don't worry about. I'm more interested in making sure that you guys get the training. There's a lot of professors out there and instructors that watch a clock, and as soon as the end of the session occurs, that's it, and things are wrapped up, and often things are left out, and I hate classes like that personally. So, we try to aim for 2 hours, but if it ends up being 3 hours or 4 hours, so be it. If you got to go, you got to go, but it will be recorded and you can come back. The bottom line is, are you here to learn, or are you here just to, say, all right, that's 2 hours of instruction. I now feel a whole lot smarter. Thank you very much. The goal is we want to make sure that you get all of the content we want to deliver. You should be here because you really want to learn this stuff. Okay?
What's the web address for BuzzNet? buzznet.3dbuzz.com. Will today's work be used in next week's webinar? I'm going to talk about that when we jump into the class for real. Are we using Visual Studio in the class? Yes. Member sponsor, but sometimes when I open the videos it says I need to be a member sponsor. If you can send a message on the forums or a PM to somebody, myself or
Ryan, just PM Nelson over on 3D Buzz and get that checked in. And Greg asks, is the free version of Unity adequate for this class? Yeah. Okay,
and yes, ReSharper, I will be using my primary development environment for this, so there will be ReSharper.
And for those of you that, you're all member sponsors, or you should all be member sponsors. All you need to do is send a message to Zach, and he will hook you up with a free license for a year. It's a little bit less than a year now. They just renewed it with us slightly for ReSharper if you're interested. Obviously, we're going to be coding in C#. I would highly recommend that you get ReSharper installed. We will be doing a one-night class on ReSharper coming up in the near future. It's definitely worth getting involved in. Just for the simple fact that ReSharper is so powerful and it will save you so much time when coding.
Is it okay to use MonoDevelop instead? If you have an editor that allows you to type text into a text file, it will be adequate.
Yes.
Is there a way of using Visual Studio Express with Unity? I am not aware. I thought I heard something about that being possible, but I'm not completely sure.
You can use it. The last time, it's been a long time since I've used it. I know you can use it, but as far as double-clicking and it opening up, to that line and all that good stuff in Unity, that doesn't work.
Yep.
But like Segfault is saying, you can get the professional version of Visual Studio for free. He can put details over there in BuzzNet right now. There's the link.
And not only that, the Visual Studio 2012 beta Ultimate, which is free, works flawlessly with Unity as long as you can set it up right, which is just a little configuration option you have to point into the executable.
Okay, so that's pretty much all the questions right now. Let's go ahead and get going, Nelson.
All right, so yeah, basically, by the end of the course, we are going to be developing a space shooter game, but I really wanted the first lesson for the class to be an actual end-to-end creating a game. So we're actually going to be putting together a basic Pong game today for class, and the homework will be simply re-implementing what I have on the screen. mainly for people who are not familiar with Unity to get more accustomed to the user interface, and for people to get a kind of feel for how Unity actually works and how it does things. But we will be spending, today putting together a basic Pong game, talking about the concepts of Unity, talking about the basic user interface of Unity, and yeah, by the end of this, we'll have something fun. And then starting...
Now, this may feel a bit ambitious for some of you, but hey, if you have trouble following along with anything, don't stress it. Remember, we're going to be making these videos available, so it'll all be good.
Right. So, someone just spent the whole weekend on making a Pong game in Unity. That's awesome.
Dang it.
Alrighty, so the first step is we're going to go ahead and launch Unity. Not surprisingly.
So let's pretend I know absolutely nothing about Unity. While we're not going to rehash all of our intro videos, pretend I know nothing. Tell me a little bit about this. So what's this first thing, this Project Wizard that just popped up?
Okay, the Project Wizard is, with Unity, what you have are, projects. And a project is essentially just a folder that has a few things in it. So what you get when you start Unity, at least the way I have Unity configured, and I will be showing the configuration option that allows for this, because by default, Unity likes doing something like opening up your last project or opening up the example project or something, and I find that obnoxious. So I have it configured to open up the Project Wizard whenever I click on the executable. And what it allows me to do is either open up existing projects or create a new project. And when creating a new project, I can also pull in some Unity packages. And Unity packages are just packets of assets, and we'll be talking about assets in a moment, that do something. We're not going to be using any of these assets. Okay, so when creating a new Unity project, the only prerequisite really is that you send it to somewhere, to some folder somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to call this Unity 101. Just a folder on my computer. And when I'm inside this folder, I just hit select folder, and then I can hit create. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a new project and not resize my window properly. It's going to create a new project in that folder. So if I go ahead and jump into that folder, we can take a look at what Unity projects look like on the file system. So the folder is, you have your assets folder, which is the most important folder, your library folder, which is used by Unity internally. It's not something you would ever want to mess with directly. Project settings should be fairly straightforward, and temp, which is just, temporary files that Unity uses. The only folder that you're going to care about as far as a Unity project is the assets folder. However, if you wanted to package up your Unity project and send it to another computer, you would have to package up this entire folder. Unless you do other configuration things like external source control, but that's out of scope. So I did promise that I would show people, before we jump into the user interface, I did promise I would show people how to get the project dialog wizard to show up every time you click on it. Because again, that is a configuration setting that I just always use because I find the default behavior obnoxious. To change Unity settings, you go down to Edit, and you jump down into Preferences. And then under here, you can simply say Always Show Project Wizard, which by default is unchecked, sadly. In addition, quick aside, if you are using Visual Studio 2012 RC, what you can do is click on this External Tools tab, go to External Script Editor, and then browse for the devenv.exe file, which represents Visual Studio. That will allow you to use the ultimate version of Visual Studio 2012 RC. Okay, so this is Unity. So the way Unity sort of works is Unity, I'm sure everybody here knows, is a game engine. And it's a game engine that has a lot of components built in that make it, straightforward to put together games, like input handling, asset management, a rendering engine, a physics engine, and other fun stuff like that. And of course, Unity being Unity, you can deploy your applications built with Unity to a variety of different platforms. So when you first load up Unity, and let me go ahead and actually make sure that I'm on the default layout. I'm going to go ahead and say revert factory settings on this, just to make sure that's the default. It looks like it is, and it looks like my window has failed me. Hold on. There we go. So this is what you're going to see when you first load up Unity. What you have right here, so if you're familiar with other level editors or you're familiar with 3D applications, some elements of this should be familiar. What we have here, first of all, the main primary window is called the scene. And the scene is simply a viewport into your application. So notice how I'm able to pan around by holding down my mouse wheel. I can rotate the camera by holding down the right mouse button, and so on. There's a few other things that people might be familiar with, like if you select an item and hit F, it'll frame it up on the screen, and so on. And of course, you have a little standard set of gizmos to allow you to go into orthographic views for right, front, top, as well as perspective. So very straightforward, at least as far as a viewport. But what this is a viewport into is what's called the scene. And in Unity, basically what you do to create a Unity application is you create a bunch of game objects. And you add components to those game objects, and then you add those game objects to what's called a scene. And a scene represents, well, it could represent a variety of different things depending on how you use that feature. Some games may only have one scene, for example, whereas other games may use one scene for the main menu and another scene for the game, whereas other games might use one scene for level 1, level 2, level 3, etc. So what you have is, with Unity, all you're really doing is you're adding game objects and configuring them and placing them into the scene. And so you see that this is a 3D representation of the scene. So everything within the scene has 3D coordinates relative to the scene's origin.
And Nelson, if I can jump in real quick, just to simplify this for everyone, it really is that simple. That's all it is. In putting together a game, all you're doing is placing a bunch of game objects into a scene. These game objects are then configured with different types of components. Components can be anything from rigid bodies to custom scripts that you've written yourself that interact with other game objects within a scene. That's it. It is that simple.
Yep. So the next window to talk about would then be the hierarchy window. Hierarchy window is, it's basically just a tree view of the game objects that are located in your scene. So you'll see the default scene for Unity just simply contains a main camera. And we'll talk about the main camera a little bit more when we get into the inspector. So again, the hierarchy is the hierarchy of game objects. All the game objects in this particular scene that I have loaded is listed underneath this window. Then we have project. The project window literally corresponds to everything, every file that's underneath the assets folder of your project. So remember, this is our project. When I selected this Unity 101 folder and hit create project, this is what Unity created for us. It created this assets folder, and it's empty, but everything that I put into the assets folder is going to be placed in the project. So project allows you to look at all of your game assets. What an asset is it's anything that can be used to construct a game object with. So an asset could be a texture, a model, a script, sounds, materials, physics settings, GUI skins, any individual file that isn't necessarily tied to a scene yet, but you use those assets to compose your game objects. So anything that isn't part of a scene will be put in your assets folder, which will be represented here as a hierarchy of files and folders underneath the project window. Okay, so the inspector window. Inspector window is what you use to configure your game objects. So notice that when I click, this is a left click by the way, by default, I don't know if that's configurable. When I click on this camera, notice how the inspector fills up with a bunch of stuff. So you'll notice that there's a variety of things in this. I'm not going to go over all of these settings. All these settings are gone over in the other videos. But you'll notice that what we have here, in reality, is that we have a game object that has a variety of these things attached to it. These things are called components. So this game object, it's not necessarily a camera per se, as much as it is a game object, which all a game object is a transform, meaning the only prerequisite of object existing within the game is that it has a transform. If you're not familiar with a transform, what a transform represents where this is positioned in the world. And you'll notice that we have conveniently delineated the transform into the position, rotation, and scale, allowing us to, edit the transform. So this is the only commonality between all game objects, really. Other than a few other things, of course. But what makes this game object a camera is because it has this nice little camera component attached to it. And this camera component is what represents the ability of this thing to be a camera. And you'll notice that it has a variety of little options. A few interesting ones are, for example, the background, which allows us to change the background of the camera's rendering. Think of the background as just the color of the pixels that get filled before rendering anything. And then you also have a few other fun stuff like field of view, clipping planes, and other stuff. Notice also we can change the projection from perspective to orthographic. We're not going to go over the difference between the two because everything that we're going to be doing in this class is going to be centered around the perspective projection for cameras.
Now, Nelson, this might be a good time to go ahead and jump in and answer some of the questions since they're starting to pile up real quick. Let's see, where did we leave off at?
Well, I don't know. Gavin, there's no Gavin here.
I know it just makes things a little bit more interesting, but
I think there was. I think someone. I was right about to answer the Windows versus Mac.
Go ahead.
Do I need to use Windows for this class rather than Mac? And the answer is no. You can use Mac. You'd be using MonoDevelop in Mac or whatever other text editor that you want to use because, again, I'll be talking about the relationship between the IDE and the Unity editor because I think that's very fundamental for people to understand. However, at the end of the day, your scripts are simply text file assets underneath your project. They do not necessarily need to be tied to any particular IDE and can be edited just as text files.
We also had a question coming in from Ty in terms of client-server gaming. Would Unity be more of the client, the server, or both?
That's an interesting question, and the reason why I would by default, and what I would prefer would be that Unity is just an aspect of the client. Unity is a game engine. A lot of the things within Unity are all about presentation. It's all about input handling, stuff like that. Stuff the server really doesn't care about. The server just cares about game logic. But I have heard of people using headless Unity players to simulate physics. I don't necessarily know if that's the best way to do it, because I know that there are dedicated physics engines that work in C# very well. However, I have heard of that. So,
well, I can confirm. Yes, you can. I mean, we've done it in the past. You can use a headless build of Unity on the server, but it is not the way that we would go about doing it.
Somebody asks, what does ReSharper do? And what ReSharper does is makes me very happy.
The end. Next question.
Is there a way to split the viewport into 4 sections?
No, hang on. I was just kidding. Well, for the viewport thing, yeah, Nelson, if you want to just show them, just go up to window. We can do this real simple.
Window, layouts, and then we can do 4x4 split.
And now, boom, we're now in the world of Maya. No, I was just kidding about ReSharper. Go ahead and explain to Jonathan what exactly ReSharper is. And actually, his question was, does it work with Visual Studio 2012? Well,
certainly. I was actually answering something from BuzzNet. But yeah, it does. But you have to use the ReSharper 7 early access preview builds. You cannot use the ReSharper 6 stable builds. But as far as ReSharper goes, did you want me to answer that question?
Yeah, go ahead, because there are a few people that are asking what it is.
ReSharper is an add-on into Visual Studio that works with both C# and Visual Basic. And what it does is it gives you a lot of features. ReSharper eases a navigation of things. It has a very nice unit test runner. It has ways of transforming your code. It has ways of analyzing your code and informing you of potential issues. It has just everything in it. Any high-level transformation you could make or want to make to your code, you can most likely do through ReSharper. And then on top of that, you have all of the navigation stuff like jump to type, jump to file, jump to Visual Studio jumped to definition, but still, and so on. And then you have other little miscellaneous tools, like, for example, a little to-do window, a unit test runner, and all that cool stuff. So it's basically amazing.
And the link was just posted over in BuzzNet just a moment ago by Mr. Gubican.
Am I using Pro? Mine looks different. That is why I ask. Yeah, Pro comes with a really, really, really great feature. We can actually change the skin. It's worth every penny.
As Nelson says sarcastically.
But this skin hurts my retinas. Okay. So...
Will I need Pro for this class, Mr. Patrick? The answer is no, you will not. The free version of Unity is just fine.
Ooh, it looks like a wild Gavin appeared.
Really?
Yeah.
Hey, that'd be cool. Let's go ahead and pull him on in.
Yeah, I have to wait for the lady to stop talking to him.
Hello, Gavin.
Hey.
Welcome into the class. Say hello to everyone.
Hello to everyone, and greetings to anyone else who's got a TalkTalk ISP. Because I don't know what exactly, I think it was like a second past midnight. I was halfway through a sentence with Nelson, and my internet stopped. Just went away. And I didn't think it was coming back, to be honest. Because it went away at midnight. It was as though I think they were...
Something was up.
Yeah, I imagine they were rebooting their servers, like doing something somewhere. So I didn't think I was getting it back. But anyway, hurrah!
Yeah, welcome back, or welcome to the class now. Welcome back from our conversation from earlier. And as I was saying earlier, ladies and gentlemen, Gavin is our TA. He'll play a very important role throughout the class. He'll also be jumping in as a student with a voice, asking questions as well of Nelson. So make sure you're nice to him, because he will be grading homework.
Alrighty.
And we'll talk about homework a little bit later, Gavin.
Okay, so another question coming from Mr. Test. Can you recommend a ReSharper equivalent for Mac, or does it work for Mac too? ReSharper is a Visual Studio plugin, and Visual Studio only works on Mac, so no. Of course, you can certainly use Parallels or Boot Camp to put Windows on your Mac and install Visual Studio through that. Which version of Visual Studio and WebSpark do I download since I'm running Windows 7? They'll all run on Windows 7.
There isn't... I know what that... I think what the problem there is. There isn't an x64 version for 7 of 2000. I don't know whether that's the case for 11, but that was the case for 2010. There was only an x86 version.
Well, yeah,
you use the same version.
From what I understand, that there isn't a 64-bit version of Visual Studio in existence. At least I haven't seen one.
Right, that'd be why then.
Okay.
So yeah, there is only. It is confusing though because it is labelled as being an x86 version, or it was on the download site.
Yeah, and that'll work in x86-64 just fine.
And thank you for my hug, Flash.
Okay, next question from Mr. Marvin.
Are there any other productivity tools used in Visual Studio besides ReSharper? I use the Power Productivity tools. I believe that's a free extension. I use that for now, but Visual Studio 2012 doesn't support it because they integrated a lot of those features into the latest version of Visual Studio. But I do use that other plugin, and I particularly like the tab wells and the tab highlighting with it. Can
I just ask, is Visual Studio 2012 just what they're calling the release version of what was 11 beta?
Well, it's Visual Studio 11. Like, that's the version number, and then the product name is going to be Visual Studio 2012.
Gotcha.
Okay, and we can see you, Richard. So, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead. All right, awesome. So for those of you that put questions over in the questions panel, we appreciate it. And we will get back to you on another round of those coming up soon. So if you have questions that come to mind, feel free to put them over there. Just know we're not going to stop right away to answer them as we're going to get a little bit more content out. So far, we've done a little bit of discussing the Unity interface. and game objects, and a little bit about the camera, a little bit about what's going on over in the inspector, if you want to pick it back up from there, Nelson.
Yep. So another window that we have that we can use is called the game view. And the game view is basically whatever our camera is looking at. And that's it. So for example, if I notice how I have my camera selected and I'm looking at the inspector, if I jump over to the game view and actually change my camera's background, I'm sort of proving that what we're doing is looking through our main camera. So
let's make the simplest game in the entire world, Nelson. Just build a cube and hit play.
Well, actually,
that's too simple. That doesn't even count. There's nothing even there except the camera. Let's make a cube.
Okay, so what we're going to do is, now remember, just keep this at the forefront of your mind while working with Unity. Everything in Unity is a game object. The only difference between different game objects are the components that are attached to it. However, Unity has a variety of pre-configured game objects that we can create. And when we create these pre-configured game objects, what we get is a game object with a set of, well, predefined components attached to it. So for example, if I go up to Game Object, Create Other, and select a cube, and frame up on it because it's really far away, notice how I have a cube. However, this isn't anything magical. This is just a game object. We know it's a game object because it's in our hierarchy, and we can see it. But notice over here on the inspector how it has a transform. Like I said, everything that's a game object has a transform. Notice how we have a mesh filter, and a box collider, and a mesh renderer. We're not going to be talking about mesh filters or mesh renderers today. We are going to be talking a little bit about box colliders. But ultimately, what to take away from this is all a cube is a game object with these things pre-configured on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this cube back to the origin by saying 000 on its translation. And that should place it within view of my camera. So now when I hit play, we have a cube. Let me go ahead and lighten
most exciting game you've ever seen.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and lighten up the camera a little bit so we can see our cube better. Oh,
that's like Ashley just said. That's beautiful. Except Nelson's having some difficulty with color right now. That's just beautiful, man. I love it.
And what Nelson was saying about everything, the only difference between the types of game objects is what components are on them, is a key thing to keep in your mind, because I have spent an entire day before I literally rewrote my code 3 times, couldn't work out why nothing was displaying, and then I realized that it was because I'd made the camera myself and hadn't added a GUI layer to it. GUI layer being a component that is just naturally there on the camera when Unity makes one for you. And if that isn't there, your GUI doesn't show up. Similarly, if you haven't got an audio listener on it, you won't hear any audio. But it's very easy to forget that when you're working in code.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Also, let me get you to do this for me real quick. Go ahead and hit stop. So first thing, everyone bring your attention down to the hierarchy. You can see in the hierarchy that we now have a cube and the main camera showing up. Nelson, go ahead and create an empty game object. I think it'd be very important for them to see.
Okay, so if you go up to game object, you can say create empty. And again, remember, what I said was the commonality between all game objects is the transform. And you'll notice that when I click on game object, we have a transform that we can move around. Now, because it doesn't have any components on it, it doesn't do anything, but we can still move it around. In addition,
and empty game objects can be incredible, or they are incredibly important, and we'll see that as we progress further into the class.
Yep. I also want to point out that we can rename game objects. So if I have this game object here for a specific reason, I can just right-click, say rename, and call this foo.
Or just hit F2 on most things, and it'll bring up a
or F2
text entry field.
Okay. So, yeah.
Oh, real quick, this is right before you get kicked off again. Brian had a question over the webinar that said, how long has this been going on? The webinar page said 8 was the start. I'm not sure which page you were seeing 8. I know that 99% of the students were here at 7 our time, which is when we actually kicked off. But we generally, especially on the first day, gave about 10 minutes before we really got things going, so you really haven't missed much. Plus, this video will be posted for viewing over and over again on 3D Buzz. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do something fun. So we've already talked about Unity quite a bit now. And again, to learn about more of the different things you can do in Unity, watch those videos.
There was one other thing I quite think should be pointed out right at the beginning, which is if you just go and hit play and pop back to the scene view.
Oh, right, yeah, that's a good point.
And stick a sphere in there on top of the next to the cube. I think that would look nice, like a head on top of a body. And get it all lined up nicely.
What was that? I can't actually hear you right now because... Hello?
Yeah, Gavin's still there. He muted.
Oh, right. But yeah, when you are working in the game, in the scene, you can actually edit your stuff while your game is running, which is very cool. But then when you go ahead and hit stop, the edits that you make go away. So I wanted to sort of point that out.
This will annoy you repeatedly over many years. Am I wrong?
No,
it's incredibly. It's certain things that you change will stay. Generally speaking, anything where you've got to hit apply to get it to lock, but most everything will go back to how it was before you played around.
Yep.
And just the best thing to do is to get in the habit of only changing one thing at a time, really.
Right. Well, we have a student that many of you guys know about that Nelson and I work with often on private lessons. There's something that you can do to let you know quickly that you are in a play mode, and that is you can basically change the tint of your UI. And he uses a horrible, it's up under preferences. If you go to colors, it's right there, play mode tint. And if you want to change that to something absolutely horrible, then you'll be like, hey, what do you know? It's absolutely nasty looking. So right now, like that. And that's pretty close to his, now that I think about it. And his is kind of a brownish color.
How long have you known about this, and why didn't you tell me? That's fantastic.
Known about it forever.
Every time he presses play in Unity, my eyes bleed.
Yeah, and it's funny because even though his screen changes and we're sitting there working with him, he'll still make edits over in his inspector. And it's like, why are you making those edits? You're in play mode. They're all about to go away. It's like, darn it. That's right. So anyway, it's just a nice little tip.
Alrighty, so...
Is somebody cutting grass over there, Nelson?
Yeah. It's
okay.
Very, very pleasant right now. It's exactly...
It sounds like they're mining ore in EVE Online, actually. But it's got that...
Actually, I think we've been here for about an hour. I think right now might be a good time for a break, just because we've been here for an hour, and hopefully within the next 5 minutes this noise will go away. And not only that, I was just about to jump into actual code. So, yeah, if you guys have any more questions about the Unity editor of what I've covered, be sure to place them in the webinar panel. For those of you who don't know, we typically take breaks every hour for people to, get up, stretch their legs, get water, go outside, whatever. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be back soon. And we're back. Okay.
All right, welcome back.
So, yes, Unity. Questions. Wow, a lot of questions.
There's also just thoughts and suggestions and things like that. Just look for the actual questions because we're tight on time.
What assets are we going to include with the Pong project? Pong. I've been doing too much chess programming. Pong project. None. All of the assets that you need will be built. Okay, so
I see one person that just said that the participate button on BuzzNet is not working again.
If it's not working, go ahead and refresh. We have quite a few people in the class today, and there's also another class going on. Or no, there will be another class next week going on.
Next week. But right now, it's a very heavy... it's a heavy load on BuzzNet at the moment compared to our normal classes. Who would have known that so many people wanted to learn Unity? But that's awesome.
Okay, so, ooh, sweet. We get a chance to see one of these. Let's go ahead and introduce a new window in Unity really quickly. And that's the console window. You can open up the console window either by clicking on one of these console notifications or by going Window Console. You should always keep your console window visible. Typically, I split my console window with my inspector when I'm low on screen space, because typically during play mode I'll use my console, and on inspector I'll be using this when I'm editing. Now the console window, you will get a lot of stuff like this. Don't worry about it. I do not know what a PPTR cast failed when dereferencing means. It's some sort of internal Unity thing. It happens quite frequently. It's very obnoxious, but it happens. So I'm going to go ahead and hit clear to clear out all those log messages.
I haven't actually had that error.
I've never seen it before.
I've seen everything. I've seen everything.
Have you now?
Yeah, I've not seen that one.
Neither have I.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about scripts. What's a script? Well, a script, you can have 3 types of languages in your Unity projects. Unity supports 3 languages. It supports JavaScript, C#, and Boo. I hope everybody here is familiar with the idea of JavaScript. It's a very common language used on the web. The JavaScript engine built for Unity, however, is a custom JavaScript engine, and it includes a few additional language extensions to it, such as iterator blocks and type safety. But we will not be using JavaScript. We will be using C#. We also have Boo. Boo is another .NET language. It's not a Microsoft .NET language, but it is a very fun little language. However, because Boo in itself is not very well recognized within the community, doesn't have very much documentation towards it, doesn't have much of a following, we are going to be primarily focusing on C#. So, before I go ahead and create the first C# script, let's go ahead and talk about the organization of the project. What I typically like to do is have folders for each type of the assets that I might be using. You'll notice something interesting. I've talked about scenes. Scenes are actually assets. A scene is simply an asset in your project. However, we don't have any scenes in our project window. That's because when you launch a Unity project for the first time, you are looking at the default scene, and if you haven't saved it yet, it's not going to be put on disk. So to save it, go ahead and hit Control-S. That will bring up a save dialog. Notice how up the top left it says Save Scene. Notice how also we are positioned in the Assets folder. All assets need to go under the Assets folder. What I'm going to go ahead and do is create a new folder called Scenes. And then I'm going to create the file name as Scene1 and hit Save. When I do that, remember how I said that the project window is simply whatever you have in the Assets folder. So we have our Scene1 now placed there in our Scenes folder. So let's go ahead and add a script. I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call it Scripts. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a C# script, and I'm going to call it Paddle. And hit Enter.
Now, at this point, why don't we start getting people involved? Everyone that has Unity can follow along with what you've got. It's not a bad idea.
Okay. Well, if you guys want to follow along, you're more than welcome to. Remember that the homework will be replicating these steps. It is absolutely vital to go through the motions of dealing with Unity. I can't stress that enough. If you just watch me do things, you will not learn how to use Unity. So if you guys want to follow along, you're more than welcome to. All I've done so far is I'm going to go ahead and nuke our cube and my foo from our hierarchy. And by deleting them from the hierarchy, they're removed from our scene. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-S to save that out.
Now I've reset everybody's ready check. If you're not interested in participating, just click Participate again, and that'll uncheck you from participating. If you're following along with Nelson, as soon as you get things up to this point, which should take like a fraction of a second, just go ahead and hit Ready. And we see that everybody's hitting Ready quickly. Looking fantastic.
I'm not actually ready, but you can carry on. I'm trying to find space for all my windows.
We've seen another
Matt
monitor.
Damon. Why is Matt Damon so slow today? Okay, so we've got a couple of people with one more minute. Matt, did you click ready? Yours didn't update then.
You're really calling that folder scripts?
I've surrendered.
Really?
I
That's
have.
disgraceful.
I have.
I refuse. There's no way.
It's just the terminology used in the engine, and it's the terminology everybody's going to understand. It's the terminology that everybody else uses.
Yeah.
The fact is, C#, scripting languages have some characteristics to them that are common between most scripting languages, and C# doesn't follow any of those criteria, any of that criteria, and I feel that it's an insult to refer to C# as a scripting language because it sort of lumps that language in with a lot of other languages and carries a lot of negative connotation in the programming world. That being said, if Unity wants to call them scripts, if the documentation calls them scripts, if every single help file, help thread you see calls them scripts, I'll just call them scripts.
Breathe, Nelson. Breathe. Okay, that's most everyone at this point. So let's go ahead and move forward.
How did I create the paddle script? I just went to the create button right here, and I said C# script, and I typed in paddle. Okay.
Or you can right-click on the folder you want to put it in as well.
Yeah, right-click.
Yeah, that's generally how I do it.
It's the easiest way.
Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to double-click on paddle. Now, when reading this, it says starting at Visual Studio, this might take a few seconds. Mentally replace the word seconds with minutes, days, or months.
Or not at all. Now, if when you installed Unity, you didn't untick the thing that says install monodevelop, more than likely it will open monodevelop. And I was digging around as to how to get rid of it last week, and basically the conclusion of the internet seems to be that because Visual Studio takes so long starting up, Unity basically just sort of times out and falls back to either monodevelop, or I've even had, since disabling monodevelop by changing its name, I've actually had it pop up Notepad++ sometimes when trying to, just because it takes too long. If you've already got Visual Studio open, it's better at opening another instance. But you don't panic if you do it and nothing happens. This is known to happen a lot.
Okay, so now that we have a script open, let's go ahead and talk about how Unity deals with scripts. To people who are not programmers, you might not have any context to what I'm about to say. However, for people who have worked with C# previously, hopefully I will be able to properly explain what's actually going on, because it is very important for people who are familiar with programming to understand. So notice how when I double-clicked on that script, I'm in a solution called Unity 101 C# with a single project called assembly-c#-vs. I have some references already predefined. I have System, System Core, System XML, Unity Editor, and Unity Engine. Obviously, these two are Unity-specific and are used for working with Unity. Next, notice how I have a folder hierarchy, assets, scripts, and then paddle.cs. That does correlate to what we have right here, although you will notice that it does not have a scenes folder in it. Although that file still exists, if I say show all files right here in my Solution Explorer, you'll notice scene1.unity is there, but it is not added to the project. So what happens with Unity when you try to open up a script inside of an IDE, inside of Visual Studio? What Unity actually does is it generates a CSproj and SLN, and it configures the CSproj and SLN, or it configures the SLN to contain the CSproj, and it configures the CSproj to point to all of the compatible files underneath assets, such as CS files that you can edit with Visual Studio. These files are generated by Unity on a whim. Unity will decide to regenerate these files whenever it feels that it's necessary. Typically, when you add another CS file, Unity will have to regenerate your CS proj. When it regenerates your CS proj to include the additional file, there are two important things to keep in mind. First of all, no settings that you apply to this solution or to this project will be kept. References are only for the use of IntelliSense. References do not have any bearing on what Unity actually loads in. And the references will be regenerated, meaning using NuGet, adding references manually, that will not work. Now, there are ways around this. We'll talk about them, probably not in the 101, but later. But the point is that you cannot add additional references to your application or to your game, additional assemblies, through the references dialog. You may also not edit any of these settings underneath the project settings because, again, all of these are wiped out. The existence of the SLN and the CS proj are solely for Visual Studio and Visual Studio alone. The only thing that Unity cares about whatsoever are the CS files within the assets folder. That is it. When you launch your project, Unity will take all the CS files underneath your assets folder and compile them using Mono's compiler, Mono C# compiler. So I just want to...
Now, I do want to have you go ahead and spend a second to address this because David asks an outstanding question. And that is, so what about people without Visual Studio Pro? Because what I'm getting at is, if you recall, and I don't think they've changed this, you can't double-click to launch Visual Studio Express. So you're going to need to do the right-click, sync.
Right.
So go ahead and show that if you don't mind.
You're going to have to say right-click, sync Mono Develop project. Yay for conflicting terminology. But when you click on this button, what Unity will do is it'll generate for you your CS proj and your slins. By generating your CS projs and slins, you can open these files up with any editor that supports the CS proj file format, and MonoDevelop indeed does. Or sorry, Express does.
Did we ever get to the bottom of why it creates two versions of each, one with the suffix C# and one without?
No. Never figured that out. That's Unity being Unity. Okay, notice how I did jump into CS or Unity and I said sync MonoDevelop project. This forces Unity to recreate our CS projs and our slins, which brings me to the second consideration when dealing with Visual Studio within Unity. You will get this dialog a lot. What this dialog is saying is that the solution, Unity 1 C#, has been modified outside the environment. Other times it'll say the project assembly-C#-VS has been modified, but blah, blah, blah. Whenever you see something like this, always just hit reload. Because your settings inside of Visual Studio have absolutely no bearing whatsoever on Unity, you can just go ahead and reload it. The only thing you're getting out of this is the ability to use Visual Studio with IntelliSense, because Visual Studio is being configured to point to the Unity editor and Unity engine managed assemblies.
Okay, so Nelson, before we get going much further, a couple basic questions that have come in regards to you getting up to this very point over in the questions panel.
If you write a script in IDE, does Unity update the script in real time? Not while your game is running. No, it doesn't. But remember, your CS files are just files. They're just files. So when I go ahead and just maybe erase a white space and hit, Control S, that's going to cause Unity to recompile this file.
But Unity won't recompile the file until you switch back to Unity. Next time Unity gets focus, it will notice that something's changed and it will sort it out.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it? So yeah, rather than doing it on the fly, it does it once. When it gets focus back, it notices.
Yep. And then you'll have to restart your game if it's running to actually see the changes.
And if the game is running when you switch back, you will get a whole slew of exceptions will appear, and it may well crash Unity. I've had it crash Unity before.
Yeah, I've had bad luck with that.
Because it literally, you'll get messages about, this doesn't exist anymore.
So let's go ahead and move on down to Kevin's question.
How did you get that folder structure in VS? Unity made it for me. I did not create a folder structure. In fact, if you create folders with Visual Studio, they will not necessarily be represented in Unity. It becomes a very annoying situation where Unity will only add folders to your project if they have CS files underneath them. So if I were to create, let's say I create a folder, right here, new folder 1. This creates a physical folder on my disk. When I jump back into Unity, right-click and say Sync MonoDevelop Project, jump back into Visual Studio.
It's actually there.
Oh yeah, it's right there, new folder 1. But if I sync if I sync MonoDevelop Project and jump back to Visual Studio and say Reload, and then save changes to the following items, SLN and VS, do not do that because that's irrelevant. These changes to this SLN and the CS proj are irrelevant because Unity overwrites them. So you always hit no. Notice how the new folder 1 disappeared. It's still on disk. I can still click Show All Files and you can see it right there. I can go over to Unity and you can see it right there. But when I jump into Visual Studio, by default, you won't see it. And you won't see it because it doesn't have any CS files in it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Okay, is there a particular advantage to using Visual Studio over MonoDevelop? Visual Studio is better. I mean, I know plenty of people like MonoDevelop. I'm not going to tell people, what they like or what they should like, but I feel that MonoDevelop is a very clunky interface. That could just be because of the years I've spent inside of Visual Studio and the years I've been using ReSharper, which ReSharper does not work for MonoDevelop.
I mean, MonoDevelop,
would be an answer.
MonoDevelop is fine, but once you get yourself in tune with ReSharper, you're not going to want to ever develop again without it.
Will clicking that reload ever wipe out the code you may have been working on? No. Well, maybe. See, if I go ahead and let's say I make some unsaved changes to my CS file. These are unsaved changes. Now, if you are a programmer, you will never leave an editor without saving your file. In fact, you will never get more than a few lines at most without hitting Control-S. And if you do not do this, get in the habit of hitting Control-S as often as possible. That being said, if I make some unsaved changes to paddle.cs, jump into Unity, tell it to sync my MonoDevelop project, and jump back, it'll say reload, which is fine, but now it's saying save changes to following items. Notice how we're not saving the SLN right now, we are saving the CS file. If I hit no, those changes will go away. But if I hit yes, those changes will stay there. So notice how I hit yes, and that white space is still there. But that should be a non-issue. And it should be a non-issue because if you don't hit Control-Shift-S, like Segfall points out, that's more appropriate than Control-S in Visual Studio, after every line that you write, then you are doing it wrong anyway. You should never jump away from Visual Studio without having everything saved, because after every line, you should really save your file. What advantages does Visual Studio have over using a text editor? Oh, you don't have any... Okay. I mean, I was about to make fun of you until you said you had no C# experience. But the Visual Studio... C# being a very statically typed language has excellent tooling. We will be looking at the tooling support for C#. Visual Studio has excellent support for writing code in C#. And if you are only familiar with JavaScript, you will be blown away by the amount of tooling available for C#. Statically typed languages do have lots of advantages, and one of those advantages being excellent tooling.
Okay, I mean, an easy example, analogy would be with Word. Now, I personally hate this and have never really used it because, well, me. But imagine you were trying to write a letter and you couldn't spell. Spell check is there in Word, and that's an advantage over using pen and paper. And it's the same situation with this using an IDE, a development environment. It gives you, it knows what you're talking about. You'll notice that paddle and mono behavior there are in whatever color that is called.
Teal.
Wow, brain fail.
Teal.
Teal. And public class using void are all in and blue, you get used to the colour scheming because it knows that they're different types of things. They're not just different words.
Because even in a, like you said, you worked in a text editor, I assume that you're working with text editor has syntax highlighting. That being said, the syntax highlighting of Visual Studio is much more advanced, or the syntax highlighting for C# is much more advanced. When working in a scripting language like JavaScript, there are fewer reasons to use an IDE because those are very difficult to reason about statically because they're dynamic languages. C#, however, is very easy to reason about statically, and as a result, the tooling support is phenomenal. What are the gray circles on the bottom right of VS? Ooh, this is a bug in ReSharper. These are ReSharper thingies. But for some reason in Unity, whenever you're using a Unity project, ReSharper likes to create these until infinity. I don't know why. It's a known bug, actually.
Again, I've never...
Yeah, it's interesting, Gavin, because mine doesn't do that either.
It is a known bug I saw in their tracking software.
You know what it is? It's because neither of us had our computers built by Nelson.
That's true. True story.
No,
it's okay.
It's
okay. I like them. It looks like your Visual Studio has a whole bunch of little wheels on it, so you might just push it right off the screen. So you're good, man. You're good.
No. This is hardly an issue. It's benign, and a fix is coming. Okay, so let's...
Cool. Hang on. No, just what Stuart just said. I was just like, whoa. It sounds like advantages of typing HTML. And yes, actually, yeah, very good. For a second, I wasn't all the way up to the screen. I thought it's like, oh, okay, sounds like Visual Studio is a lot better than typing in Dreamweaver. I was like, oh, what? No. Okay, good. Yes, very correct, sir.
Okay, so let's talk about...
We did have one more slightly awkward question that came in about references.
References don't show up in my Solution Explorer. If you don't have references in your Solution Explorer, you're probably not in Visual Studio. I mean...
I've never
never ever not seen references being listed. I don't know. There's nothing to
see. Do you want to just, now that we've discussed the sort of ins and outs of it, do you want to delete that paddle script and show the creation of it again, just for the people, and then we'll go through it one more time?
Well, paddle, so I'm going to close Visual Studio, delete this, oh, great. Unity is going down for a crash.
You might want to reboot Unity.
So Unity is so great, but it can't handle deleting paddles.
Well, hey, bottom line is it crashes just like UDK. Just in my experience, a little bit less than UDK.
Yeah. Okay, so to create a script, right-click on the scripts folders, hit create, go to C# script, and type in paddle. And then...
That's right. Can you go just a little bit faster, Nelson? I think you were too slow there.
Yeah, there's a little... go ahead and right-click in your project folder on a folder or into the empty space and go to create, and then go to C# script, and then type in paddle. But anyway...
And I know I just made you do that again, but it's worth noting that once you get into the habit of working, if you work with Visual Studio and Unity, that will be the only script that you create within Unity.
Right.
The first one.
There's nothing. Yeah, you can also create. You can create classes and CS files inside of Visual Studio. Because remember, the correlation, the common thread between the Visual Studio solution and Unity itself is the assets folder. Anyway, so yeah, we've talked a lot about a lot of stuff, and we still have to make a game.
Make a game then, Nelson.
Let's go ahead and make a game.
Told you it was going to be ambitious, man.
I'm sat here with a paddle. I'm ahead of you. I've got an on-GUI.
Okay, so let's talk about what these are.
After we fix the darn bracelet.
Yeah, and
I was
get rid of the
getting to that. I was getting
delete line 15 and re-enter it. Come on, hurry up now.
I'm getting to that. See, I did this on purpose so people didn't get lost. See, I'm trying to pace myself.
Okay.
And
you're doing good.
If I don't pace myself,
Either
then
that
I get
or you
yelled
just
at.
don't know where your right bracket key is.
If I do pace myself, then I get yelled at. So I don't know. I don't know what to do. Anyway, so what we have here is we have a class that inherits from monobehavior. What monobehavior is it's a component. Meaning, by creating a class that inherits from monobehavior, we have a component that we can slap on any of our game objects. Which means that all of our monobehaviors are tied to game objects. So what we have here is a basic class. The first thing to notice about this is the horrid formatting. If you are unfamiliar...
If you're not a coder, don't stress this, but there is a specific format that we will be following with working with C#.
Well, and also, or even if you're a coder in certain other languages, where that is the standard.
True. But
that's the thing. But it's not in C#, and it shouldn't be. And make it go away.
Yeah, and to be fair, I do use this style for other languages, like JavaScript. I'll use this style. Because you get a lot of curly braces in JavaScript. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and have Visual Studio reformat this for me. Notice how I...
You did that by just deleting the very last curly brace.
Yeah, and reinserting it. Notice how a few other things changed. I also got private added to all of these methods. That was ReSharper. ReSharper does not like not having type or access access modifiers on your members. And then notice how this horrible, horrible empty line on line 6 appeared. I'm going to hit Control-X to make that go away and hit Control-S to save. Next, I'm going to remove these comments because they're awful. And finally, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to make these public. Now, the reason I'm making these public, what are these? These are methods that are magically picked up by Unity. And I hope everybody heard the frustration in my voice as I said that. These are methods that are magically identified by Unity through reflection. They are not overriding virtual members of monobehavior. They are not implementing an interface. They are not annotated with attributes. They are just magical methods that Unity magically picks up on by looking at the names and the signatures. So I make them public because if they were private, notice how ReSharper tells me to get rid of it because it's not used. So I typically make these public just to make ReSharper happy. Notice also that there is no namespace. Monobehaviors that you attach to game objects cannot be within a namespace. Unity gets very confused. So you must not put that namespace. Of course, that does lead to ReSharper telling me namespace does not correspond to file location, should be assets.scripts, blah, blah, blah. You're just going to have to ignore that. And finally, there's an extraneous using statement up here that I'm going to remove because I hate extraneous code.
Extraneous. I would just bring up, I tend to arrange my code in such a way that there is a mono folder underneath code, underneath scripts in your case. I'm just throwing this out there as another way of arranging things. But that way, because I use ReSharper to refactor my namespaces a lot, and that way I know to miss out anything that's in that folder.
Right. Because ReSharper will automatically do that. And I do that quite often, have ReSharper do that. Okay, so yes, what are these magic methods? These magic methods are invoked by Unity. The start method is going to be invoked when the game object is, when the monobehavior is attached to a game object. The update method is going to be invoked whenever the game updates. So let's go ahead and put something in our update method. Let's go ahead and say transform.position equals new vector 3, or let's just do plus equals new vector 3, and say let's go up by time.delta time times 5. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm not going to explain this quite yet. I'm going to jump back into Unity.
Delta 3? Vector 3, dear boy.
You what?
It's a vector 3.
Well, I wanted the z to be zeroed out anyway. Okay, so now we have our paddle script that has some logic on it. Logic that happens on every frame. Let's go ahead and set up our scene a little bit. Basically what we're going to have is we're going to have 3 paddles. Or 3. Wow, do I know how to play Pong? We have 2 paddles and a ball. I'm going to back up right now. Actually, I completely forgot to mention something very important to this. But now that we're actually going to jump in and start positioning our game objects, we need to be able to reason about where our game objects are positioned relative to our camera. I'm going to cheat right now because we are not going to get into the math required to determine where things should be positioned, depending on the resolution of your screen. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go up to File, Build Settings, and now we have this right here. I'm going to say Player Settings. I'm going to set the default screen width to 800, the default screen height to 600, so 800 by 600. I'm going to say Display Resolution Dialog disabled, and then I'm going to say Supported Aspect Ratios, and I'm only going to leave 4:3 checked. Next, I'm going to jump into the game window, and instead of having free aspect, I'm going to change that to standalone 800 by 600. So now I've constrained the resolution to 800 by 600. Again, to talk about the math required to get that to position right would be beyond scope at this point. So now that we have this set up, we can now sort of free-form position our game objects without having to worry about dealing with additional types of resolutions. So if I jump into our scene, I'm going to go ahead and create our different game objects. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up our camera to be at 0 by 0 minus 10. That's going to position it on the origin for X and Y, but negative 10 units away from the origin of Z.
I assume you talked before I got here about the fact that Unity is Y up.
Well, no. Unity's Y up.
The end. Continue.
Well, okay.
It is Y up. But that is covered in all of the fundamental videos, which everyone has been instructed to watch.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 cubes. So I'm going to say game object create other cube. Now I'm going to give this guy some specific numbers, and I'm going to cheat on these numbers because I already know what those numbers should be. It's going to be positioned at 16x, 0y, or 12z. The scale of this is going to be 0.5 in the x direction, 6 in the y direction, and 0.5 on the z direction. Now you might be wondering how I came up with these magic numbers, and that's just a matter of playing around. Because you'll notice if I jump into the game view, we now have a cube being positioned in a way that makes it look like a paddle. Yes, I know.
Okay, hang on. I was just going to say, now that you've got that set up there, go ahead and make sure you look over in the questions panel. Florin's kind of a little lost.
Yeah, all I did in the last bit was I made sure that the resolution was constrained to 800 by 600. And I did that by going to File, Build Settings, and then within this window, I went into Player Settings. So I clicked on this button. When you click on this button, it's slightly counterintuitive, but what it does is it opens up a panel in our inspector. So now I can go ahead and close out the Build Settings window, and I can configure my settings. So what I did was I went to Resolution Presentation. I set the default screen width to 800, the default screen height to 600, and then I disabled the Display Resolution dialog. And then I constrained the aspect ratio to 4:3, which is what 800 by 600 is. Finally, when I went into after you do that, after you set the default screen width to 800 and the default screen height to 600, there's a drop-down option available underneath the game panel if you click on the top left button. And that's going to be the standalone option, which will be the resolution constrained by your player. Okay, so
Nelson,
yes?
when getting to your, how'd you go about getting to your player preferences?
That was File, Build Settings, Player Settings.
All right, now go ahead and put that up, and let me show you another way. And then everyone else might find this useful as well, for those of you that don't know it. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, Player.
No, there's that too.
And there's that too. Just trying to be helpful. I wasn't used to going all the way around to do that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get our other paddle. I'm actually going to go ahead and name this game object. I'm going to name this game object Right Paddle. Now I'm going to go ahead and create another paddle. So that's just going to be game object, create other, cube. And then I'm going to fill this in with a few more magic numbers. But of course, these magic numbers are going to be very similar to the other one. They're just going to have a different x value. So this x value is going to be negative 16, obviously, because we want it on the other side of the screen, a y of 0, and a z of 12. The scale is going to be the same. It's going to be 0.5, 6, and then finally 0.5. So again, I got these numbers by just playing around and finding out what looks good on my particular scenario.
By the way, the shortcut to duplicate an object is Control-D. If you've got it selected, it will just duplicate it.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so if I wanted to do that faster, I could have just clicked on this and hit Control-D and then just change the position to where it goes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rename this cube to left paddle. Now we need our ball. And that's just going to be a matter of hitting game object, create other, sphere, and then positioning it. And the position of our ball is going to be 0, 0, 12, because we want to start it in the center. And then 0, 0, 0, and then 1, 1, 1. So now if I hit the play button, we have Pong set up.
All right, and that pretty much wraps up tonight's class. Really good job, everyone, and we'll see you next Thursday. Oh, you wanted to actually do some more, Nelson?
Well, I was planning on it.
Okay.
Okay, so what we have here is a basic Pong setup. What we want to do with this is we want two things. First of all, we want our paddles to be able to, and I completely forgot about this I was going to show, but okay, whatever. We want our paddles to be able to move up and down. And then we want to use the Unity Fizz extension to have our ball move across our screen. So, to do that, I'm going to jump back into the paddle script. I'm going to go ahead and create a really simple helper method and a couple of enums. And we're going to be talking about this very shortly. I'm going to create an enum called paddle direction. I'm going to create an enum, yes, of course, up and down. And then I'm going to create another enum called paddle side. And this is going to be left and right. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very simple helper method. So notice how I deleted everything out of the paddle type. We're going to create a very simple helper method for our paddle. So that's going to go ahead and be, I'm going to say private void move paddle direction, or if I was thinking about it, just PD, of course, direction. And I'm going to basically write a function or a method that will move the paddle either up or down and constrain it to the maximum and minimum values that my paddles can move up. Obviously, we do not want the paddles to move across the screen. So, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and say var movement delta equals direction equals up 1, -1 times time delta time times 2. What this is going to do is this is going to give me a movement delta for the y-axis. What this is going to do is this is going to give me a movement delta for the y-axis. So all it's doing is it's saying if the direction passed in was up, just use time.delta time times 2. If the direction was down, use -1 times delta time times 2, which will of course invert it. Time.delta time represents the amount of time that has elapsed since the last frame. Remember, frame rates are not constant. You could have a frame, your application could go from 30 frames a second to 60 frames a second to 40 frames a second during normal usage. And obviously we need to take into account that there might not be as much time between or there might not be as many times. Your update method might be called more or less depending on how fast your application is rendering. So we use time.delta time to determine the amount of time that has elapsed between the last update so that we can scale our movement in a way that's appropriate for however fast our application is rendering. So once I have this movement delta, I can go ahead and say var new y equals movement delta plus transform.position.y. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to check to see if the new y position, if it is greater than the maximum y position or smaller than the minimum y position. Remember, if I jump over into Unity and I click on this paddle and I go into game and I play around with this y, notice how the maximum that we want this paddle to move up is about exactly 10. And the minimum that we want this paddle to move down is almost exactly 10, negative 10. So we want to constrain our paddle to 10 and negative 10 in the y-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into code. And I'm going to create a few constants. So I'm going to say private const float max y equals 10, private const float min y equals negative 10. And I just take Control W on accident. Okay, so now that we have our max y or min y, I can go ahead and write a very simple bit of logic. I can say if new y is smaller or equal to max y, then new y equals max y. Else if new y is greater or equal to, or am I doing this backwards? I am doing this backwards. Thanks for letting me know, everyone. So if new y is smaller or equal to min y, then set new y to min y. If new y is greater or equal to max y, set new y to max y. And then simply say transform.position equals new vector 3. The x is going to be transform position.x, the y is going to be new y, and the z is going to be transform position z.
Are doing those if and else if checks more performant than using math.min or math.max?
No, it does the same thing. Without a method identification.
Okay.
Okay, so now I have this private method. Notice a few other interesting things I'm doing. The Unity-specific things I'm doing in this method are the time.delta time, which I've already talked about, and then this transform.position. The transform.position is going to be the transform of the game object. So if you look through all of his members, and my productivity power tools are wigging out, if we look through all of his members, we have a lot of different things we can look at, such as position, rotation, scale. We have a few methods for transforms, rotates, lookats, and so on. So I have a lot of fun stuff with this. This is the transform that corresponds to the game object. In fact, we can get to this transform by doing game object dot transform dot position, because the game object field is going to point to, or the game object property is going to point to whatever game object this particular mono behavior is attached to. How expensive is a call to new vector 3? Vector 3 is a structure, so in theory it should not incur any performance penalties because it doesn't result in dynamic memory allocation. Well, other than if you hoisted the variable into a lambda. But it should technically be more performant than instantiating a reference type, unless you box it. Of course, if you box it, then you're not only allocating memory on the stack, but you're also allocating memory on the heap and copying a bunch of stuff.
And I do want to throw this out there real quick, just looking over in BuzzNet a second ago. For those of you that are struggling with the code stuff, please keep in mind, this will definitely come across as looking Greek and most likely confusing, but we do have some of the best C# videos around from our live classes. So definitely make sure that you take a look at some of the 101 classes. And Iron Soul, hey man, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a while lately. You've missed about, 2 hours worth? But nothing that'll kill you. You're in good shape.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about our update method. So I'm going to bring back the update method. The update method, remember, is a special magical method that will be magically invoked by Unity when Unity magically decides to find it on your class.
Every frame.
Well, my point is that it's not, again, I want to just reiterate on this. It is not tied to overriding a virtual member or implementing an interface member. It is simply a method called update. And if you have a method called update, Unity will pick up on it if it's a mono behavior, and it'll invoke it every frame. So the update method, what I want to do is I want to see if the user has hit a key that should move the paddle up or down. So I'm going to go ahead and say if input get keycode.w, then move down, or up, sorry. By the way, people who are talking about ReSharper, you've actually already seen a lot of ReSharper features being used. One of them is, notice how I'm passing a argument into a method that accepts a enumeration. By simply typing the words up, notice how in the ReSharper IntelliSense it actually identified that I most likely had meant paddle direction.up. The Visual Studio IntelliSense does not do that. Then I'm also going to say else if input.getKey S, then move down. So fairly straightforward. So let's go ahead and jump into Unity and attach this. Just for some clarification, input.getKey will return true if the key is down, false if the key is up. Fairly straightforward.
Now remember, update's getting called every single frame. So every frame, if we're showing the game back to the player at 30 frames a second, this update's getting called 30 frames on every single game object that this script has been applied to. So each game object will get this update called and can then check to see, hey, has a user pressed the W key? And then we need to act accordingly. So keep that in mind.
Okay, so now I'm going to jump into Unity. I'm going to jump into my scene, and I'm going to take this script and I'm going to apply it to my left paddle. So
very important. Watch what he's doing.
So I went into my whoops. How did that happen? Okay, so I have my paddle script right here. I'm going to click and drag it over onto the hierarchy, and I'm going to drag it on top of my left paddle. Now you'll notice nothing.
Now go ahead and I was going to say, go ahead and click left paddle now. Yeah, take a look over in the inspector.
Because notice nothing happened, but we can verify that our script was attached by clicking on left paddle, looking in the inspector, noticing a paddle script was applied to it. And then when I click on this, you'll notice that this gets highlighted. So now when I go ahead and hit play, if I hit W, it moves up, and when I hit S, it moves down. And that is really, really slow.
I was about to say, and congratulations, you've made a very special version of a paddle for senior citizens.
Actually, this would be a very difficult game of Pong.
Oh, the ball moved in slow motion.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into... sorry, I accidentally clicked on reload just out of habit. A reload dialog did come up. Notice how, again, Unity on a whim will decide to reload your projects. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. Instead of multiplying this by 2, I'm going to do 15. So now I'm going to jump back and...
Can I just ask you, lines 17 and 18, are they changing later in this lesson?
No.
In that case, on lines 17 and 18, why have you made them private constant floats rather than making them public floats so that you can access them in the inspector?
Well, because I don't feel that, it's not... We'll talk about that in a second, actually. We're going to be talking about inspector thingies. But I wanted these just to be, just for some added semantic value, I wanted these to be constants. And I felt like placing them on a class level rather than a method level was more appropriate. So now jumping into Unity, I can hit play again, and there we go. Notice how I can move this paddle up and down, and it's constrained to the top and bottom of the screen. Very straightforward. So now let's go ahead, and I want to go ahead and have this paddle be usable with my up and down keys on my keyboard. So the first step a person might take is dragging this paddle script over to our right paddle and dropping it, and then hitting play again. But now I sort of have a problem. It's not exactly what I wanted. I want
single player Pong.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted the right-hand side to be controlled by my arrow keys, and obviously this isn't happening. So what I can do here is I want this script to behave differently depending on some option that I give it. Unity does have a feature that allows us to change the actual values of public fields on a per-game object basis. So what's the public field that I want? Well, because I kind of gave a spoiler early on, you are probably going to assume that I want each paddle to have a paddle side. So I'm going to say public paddle side side. Notice how this is... Oh, we do have an error right there. I did get an error really quickly because of the accessibility of paddle. The type paddle is a public class, whereas paddle side was previously an internal enumeration. People who were in C# 102 should be able to follow along with that. And to fix this particular error, what I have to do is make paddle side a public enum. And then out of sake of consistency, I'm also going to make paddle direction public. And again, for those of you who ask why using an IDE was great, if you are used to using a scripting language in a text editor, you will not be used to seeing compilation errors being displayed in line with your code. Notice how I did not have to jump all the way back into Unity, hit play, and find an error. I had the error presented to me immediately. And not only did I have the error presented to me immediately, I can just click on this little ReSharper dialog, or this ReSharper button, or hit Alt-Enter, and I can have ReSharper fix the problem for me. So yes, static languages are amazing. Anyway, so this is a field. I don't like fields. Nobody likes fields. Fields suck. But we have to use them when we want to do the thing that I want to do with Unity right now with to and or. I lost my train of thought.
Well, I'll help you out right there. We had a question coming in from Troy that you might want to take just a second to answer. It's actually a very easy one.
Oh, right. He was asking about the ternary operator. The ternary operator, called a ternary operator because it's the only ternary operator.
Highlight the operator.
Not the
operands.
The operator is this and this. The question mark and the colon. And the ternary operator, what it does is it checks to see if the first operand is true. If the first operand is true, the expression will evaluate to the second operand. If the first operand is false, the expression will evaluate to the third operand.
And so if you look at that, you can see that if the direction is up, then move delta is going to be 1, and then jump outside of our parentheses, so you basically have 1 times time.delta time times 15. If direction is not equal to paddle direction dot up, then we're going to get a -1, so now it's going to be the opposite. So basically -1 times delta time times 15.
Shorthanded if statement. It's a shorthand for a type of if statement. If statements do not have a type or a value. Ternaries do have a type and a value, meaning ternaries actually evaluate into something, whereas if statements do not evaluate into anything. Anyway, so yes, now we have a public field, and this public field is going to allow us to do something kind of neat in the Unity inspector. However, I will understand it if people have problems using public fields, because I do too. So let's go ahead and use this side to do something. I'm going to actually go ahead and write some kind of ugly code just really fast, get this out of the way. I'm going to say if side is left, then do this, else if side is right, then basically do this, except for the keys will be different. And again, I'm trying to keep this code as simple, straightforward as possible for everybody to be able to follow along with. So, yeah. So is
everyone who's done the preceding classes in C# and C++ with you will know how much pain you're in at the moment.
So is everybody more or less good with what I have here? I have a public field on my paddle behavior, and if it's set to left, we'll use the W and S keys to move. If it's set to right, we'll use the up arrow and down arrow keys.
Now might be a good time to just pause the video and give people a chance to catch up, seeing as we're coming up on that sort of time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
No, it's about 2 hours. Well, actually, just over 2 hours in now.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause. And we're back. So now that we have the important aspect of what we just added to the paddle was we gave it this public field. This public field is typed to an enumeration, and the enumeration has two values, left and right. So let's jump back into Unity and see how we can take advantage of this public field and get our different paddles to behave differently on different game objects. So I'm jumping back into Unity now. Notice if I play the game, notice how using W and S still makes both of these go up and down. But what I can do now is for the paddles, you'll notice that underneath the script component, we now have this side. This corresponds directly to the public field. You'll notice it's currently defaulted to left, because that is the default for this particular enumeration type. However, if I jump over to the right, I can change this side from left to right. And by doing that, now the left paddle moves with W and S, and the right paddle moves with up and down. All right, so how's everybody feeling so far? As far as renaming the hierarchy, just either right-click, hit rename, or click on it and hit F2.
And then we got questions we can work our way down through.
How did you do just that? Do just that?
How did you just do that, perhaps?
Well, if you click on the individual paddles, because they have the paddle script associated with them, there's now an option to choose which side those individual paddles are on. So I'm not sure why your paddles aren't moving. The code that I have written on the screen does work. There's always going to be the open office hours and reviewing the video later.
And of course, the important thing, make sure you've actually applied your script to the paddle.
Mm-hmm. And you do that by clicking on the paddle and seeing if there's a paddle script, a component attached to it. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and talk about the ball. Because we really don't have a whole lot more code to write. In fact, the ball script is going to be very small. We're going to be taking heavy advantage of the Unity physics engine. So notice how what we have here is this component. And this component is, how did you frame into the paddles on the scene window? You click on a game object and hit the F key, and you frame into it. My paddles disappear on key press when playing. It's likely that you have this code mixed up.
I would suggest it's probable that you've got either X or Z instead of Y at some point in one of your transform.position.Ys.
I have a parser error saying that I'm using both OS with Windows in the paddle.cs. Could you paste the error into the thing? Type transform does not contain a definition for position. No extension method for position.
Position. That doesn't say position, it says position.
Yeah, and that's another reason why you should be using an IDE, because if you misspell this, so PSSITION, notice how it becomes red. That's ReSharper telling me that it cannot resolve the symbol. But if I back up on this and hit Control Space and start typing in the word position, Notice how my IntelliSense tells me that there is a member called position on the transform.
But then, as you're so keen to usually point out, the spelling doesn't matter.
No. As far as removing, if you want to remove a component from a game object, you click on the game object, open it up in the inspector, and then click on this little gear icon next to the component you want to remove, and say Remove Component.
While you're there, I'd just like to talk about the reset in that option. One of the things that will frustrate you until you remember this is that we've demonstrated how when you save and build in Visual Studio and then switch back to Unity, things will update. Public field values will not. So that when you first add a public field, like when Nelson added the side enum, the next time you went into Unity, because it was new, it updated. But if you had set that value in script like you normally would, in constructor in start, and then change that value in code, it will not update the new value. In that case, if you've got a whole swathe of values that you want to do, you can use reset there to reset the script to its default.
Yeah, so if I hit reset, notice how it changes back to left. Yeah, as far as the accessibility error, remember to make sure that you give both of these EDUMs the public access modifier. Otherwise, they will have inconsistent accessibility for the paddle type, because the paddle type is a public class, and having a public field of a public class that is not a public type will cause an error. So to fix that, you make these public types. So as far as where you can, if you have an error, copy and paste it and send it over into the questions panel. So for example, if I introduce...
Please.
You what?
I was just going to say, Gav, please help with checking the high priorities over there, the flags.
If I were to introduce an error, notice how in Visual Studio, because Visual Studio is awesome, I immediately get a parser error. But if I jump back into Unity with this parser error, notice how I now have an error being shown on the bottom left. If I click on this, it'll open up the console window, which decided to open up all the way on my other monitor. So inside of the console window, you can now click on the error and copy and paste it. Or you can double-click on the error and it'll jump to in Visual Studio directly to where the error is located. Transform.position assign attempt for right paddle is not valid. It looks like you're trying to assign the X to infinity. So make sure that this code is proper. For exposing members to Unity, do they always have to be public? For exposing fields to Unity, they always have to be public. The update method does not have to be public. I make it public so ReSharper stops telling me that the private member is not used. All right, well, if you have a compiler error, be sure to paste it into the questions panel, because there are 2.5 billion reasons why there might be a compiler error.
Michael asked about yes, you could change the camera to orthographic if you wanted. The numbers that you've used for positions and so forth would need changing to match because they won't be the same. But that's a setting just in the camera. There's a checkbox for is orthographic in the actual component.
Anyone remind me of the difference between members and fields? Fields are members. A member is anything underneath a type. A field is a thing underneath a type. Therefore, a field is a member. However, a member could also be a method or a property. Okay, getting error, inconsistent accessibility. If you have inconsistent accessibility. Remember to make the enumerations public. If they are not public, and you are trying to expose them on a public field of a public type, you will get an error. You need to make sure that any type that you expose publicly on a public type, that type must also be public. So if I delete this public access modifier, notice how I now get the error inconsistent accessibility. But by adding the public modifier back into this type definition, that error goes away. An object reference is required to access non-static member Unity Engine Transform.Position. It is very likely that you have a capital T. Notice if I add in a capital T, I get the exact same error that you have. So the T must be lowercase. That's because we're not accessing the transform type, we're accessing the transform property. Because obviously accessing the transform type doesn't really make much sense. We want to access the transform property, which is always going to be the lowercase transform.
And I'm going to do one of my traditional, I'm probably going to sound like a real hard ass now, but when you get an error, when you get an exception or an error message, don't go, oh, it's an error. Read what it tells you and try to understand what it tells you. This isn't C++. C#, Visual Studio in particular, is very good about giving you nice, clear information about what the problem is and where to go looking for it. Yes, sorry. I just felt the need to say that.
Yeah, exactly. Paddle 3818, expression denotes a type where a variable, value, or method group is expected. Gabriel, could you post line 38 of your paddle.cs in the questions panel?
Just the 18th character.
Yeah. Kevin Nelson. Ooh, funny story. I know a lot of people with the last name of Nelson, but I'm the only person I know who has the first name of Nelson. I find that odd. When I use W and S on my right panel moves, using air as my left paddle moves. Shouldn't mine be the other way around? Yeah, if you're getting the opposite way around, check your update method and make sure that it's appropriately saying if side is left, then use the W key and the S key. If side is right, then use the up key and the down key. If that is good, then make sure that your left paddle has a side set to left, and your right paddle has a side set to right.
Who is it? Gabriel. That should say else if side equals paddle side dot right. Sure.
Oh, right. Yeah. So your error is this probably. Let's see what this says. Well, you probably are getting a different error because you're building with mono.
He's got cannot implicitly convert type to float to bool is what he's got.
Yeah, make sure that that's correct. How do I dock the console window next to the inspector? The windowing in Unity works very straightforward. Click and drag on the word console, and you can drag it anywhere to dock it, or you can have it floating. If you want to dock it alongside another window, click and drag on the word console and drag it next to the word inspector. Now, if you drag it inside of the inspector window, it's going to think that you want to dock left or right to that window. But if you drag next to the tab inspector, it'll appropriately figure that out. Argument 2 cannot convert object expression to type float. Object expression. Could you post line 48, Carl? Or wait a sec, did you figure that out already? Or set correctly in Unity code. Are you looking at your scene the opposite way around? Make sure that you're looking at it over the shoulder of your camera and not on the other side. Transform.position equals new vector 3 transform position x new y. Carl, make sure that your new y is typed to a float. Notice how I'm using implicit typing right now, but because I'm adding movement delta to transform.position.y, it gets typed to a float. Make sure that it's not an object.
And Cyrus asks a beautiful question that just came in.
Just curious. I thought it was GameObject.transform.position, not transform.position, but I see that both work. I'm C# illiterate, but why does that work? It works because the transform property is inherited from the monobehavior type. And all it is an alias to GameObject.transform. So transform is a shorthand for GameObject.transform. It does the exact same thing. Type Unity.transform does not contain definition for...
Already done that one, that's why it's ticked off.
Okay. Is it best practice to use implicit typing? Yes. And if implicit typing degrades the ability for you to read your code, that means your code wasn't readable to begin with. I mean, I can go on for hours about the whole implicit typing versus explicit typing thing. But we're not going to do that right now because I've done it many, many times on the site. Many times. Okay. So let's go ahead and write some code.
Balls! Give me balls!
Nelson, I heard your...
Currently, this isn't so much a game as waving at a sphere.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to jump back onto some code at this point. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our ball to move. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to use the built-in Unity physics engine to perform our physics operations. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename sphere to ball, because I think ball is more appropriate in the context of this game. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give it a rigid body. So I'm going to go up to Component, Physics, Rigid Body. Notice how I have ball selected in my hierarchy. That's important, because when I go to Component, Physics, Rigid Body, it adds a rigid body component to my ball. Now, what a rigid body is we're not going to be talking a whole lot about physics in this lesson or in this class as a whole, but just a quick rundown. A rigid body is an aspect that can be simulated. It's a physical aspect of your game that can be simulated using the Unity physics engine. I'm going to give it some magical properties that, well, the first, I'm only going to give it one magical property. Everything else is important. I'm going to set its mass to 0.01 so that we get a better effect for when it bounces around. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to constrain it to freeze the position Z on both position and rotation so that it doesn't move in the Z axis. It only simulates on the X and Y axis. The final thing I'm going to do is uncheck use gravity, because you notice if I hit play right now, it just falls. Which doesn't really help us at all. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click on the ball and uncheck use gravity. So now we have a ball. It still doesn't do anything, but at least right now it has enough information about it to perform some physics calculations. So I'm going to go ahead and create a ball script. And what that script is going to do is it's going to go ahead and make it so our ball starts with initial velocity. So I'm going to create a script called ball. And again, that was right-clicking on the scripts folder, going to create and hitting C# script. And then I'm going to go ahead and double-click on ball. I'm going to hit reload because that happens a lot. I'm going to clear up the formatting. I'm going to leave the start in and make it public. Actually, I'm going to notice something funny about this. ReSharper and Visual Studio did not, or ReSharper did not initialize for this file. Notice how I have no ReSharper features enabled for this file. If this happens to you while ReSharper is installed, close the file and open it back up again. Now you'll notice that ReSharper is indeed active because our extraneous using statement is grayed out, which I'm going to delete. Then I'm going to delete the update method. I'm going to create another public method on it. I'm going to say public void reset. And the reason I'm going to do a reset method is this method is going to be invoked multiple times. What the reset method is going to do is it's going to set the ball into its initial state, which is going to be transform.position new vector 3 0 0 12. That sets the ball to where it is right now in our scene, but remember, when the ball goes past a paddle and hits a boundary, it needs to be reset back to the origin of where the ball should be. Then I'm going to say rigid body dot add force. I'm going to put 5 in the x direction, and then I'm going to put random dot range 1 through 4 in the y direction and 0 in the z direction. What this is doing is this is telling the physics simulation that I want to add this force to the ball. So I want it to go 5 in the x direction, a random between 1 and 4 in the y direction, and a 0 in the z direction.
And note that, again, that's rigid body with a lowercase r.
Yes, this rigid body does have a lowercase r. Okay, so in the start, I'm going to go ahead and invoke reset because, well, all start's going to do is add the initial force. Okay, so now if I jump back into Unity and hit play, you'll notice that absolutely nothing happens. Can anybody guess why nothing happened? I mean, I actually did legitimately make a mistake, but I actually identified the mistake immediately. But this is a very common mistake.
Very common.
I simply forgot to attach the script to my ball. So I'm going to drag ball over to ball, and then I'm going to verify in my inspector that the ball script is indeed added. So now when I hit play, notice how the ball just flies away. If I go into my scene, I can actually watch it fly away further. It's just going to fly away forever because it has nothing to collide against.
Best game ever.
Yeah. Okay. So how do I make this work right? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 more things. I'm going to create some game objects that I'm going to construct manually, and what they are going to have are box colliders. Box colliders are how you, well, it's a box collider. I mean, in game programming terms, a collider, is something that represents the logic for identifying if one object has collided with another object. A box collider uses a very simple formula. It's the fastest type of collider that simply uses the 6 points, the 8 points, or however many points, my brain has stopped working, of a cube, 8 points of a cube, and it identifies if that object intersects any of them, or intersects any of the faces that they create.
Is that actually faster than the Sphere Collider?
Actually, that's a good point. Sphere Collider's faster.
That's just a distance check.
Exactly, yeah. Anyway, Nelson was wrong. Sphere Colliders are actually faster than box colliders. But box colliders are the second on the list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a box collider on the top and on the bottom. And they're going to make the ball bounce between the edges of my screen. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Game Object and say Create Empty. Because I don't want this game object to be anything that's physically represented. I only want this game object to be used for calculations. I'm going to rename this game object to Ceiling. Then I'm going to go to Component, Physics. Now notice I do have Ceiling selected in the hierarchy. This is vital. Then I go to Component, Physics, Box Collider. By doing that, we now have a Box Collider component on our game object. So let's go ahead and type in some magic numbers to get our transform of our object to be where we want it to be. Because right now it is literally just a box. So I'm going to position it at 0, 13, 12. That makes this object appear right on the top of my screen, right outside of view. For the scale, I'm going to give it 60, 1, and 1. That will make it encompass the entire view. I'm not going to worry about configuring the box collider right now. The box collider, it's enough that the box collider exists for what I'm trying to demonstrate. Now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my ceiling by hitting Control D. So now I have 2 ceilings. And I'm going to rename one of the ceilings floor, and I'm going to set its y to -13. So now I have a floor and a ceiling. All of these are our game objects that have box colliders associated with them. They will appropriately collide with our rigid body. So now when I hit play, oh, that was a bad example. Now when I hit play,
Deja vu. Now when I hit play.
Okay, well, there we go. It bounced off that, and then it bounced there. We just saw it bounce off the top collider, and now it's just kind of rolling. So you'll notice now that because, remember that our paddles have box colliders associated with them. Because we created our paddles by going to Game Object, Create Other, and Cube, that means that our left paddle and our right paddle already have box colliders associated with them. So now we can actually play Pong, sort of. You'll notice something rather problematic about our physics simulation. Yeah, the floor coordinates were 0, -13, 12, with a scale of 60 in the x direction.
Did you line those up so they're exactly or at the edge of the screen, or have you left some space?
No, they're pretty much exactly at the edge of the screen.
I was thinking, because would they not limit your paddles to save you doing the actual?
No, they wouldn't, because of the way that the paddles are being controlled. The paddles aren't being controlled through the simulation.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to instruct our physics simulation to include bounce. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a physics material. I'm going to create a new folder underneath my project called physics. And then underneath the physics folder, I'm going to right-click on that, go to create, and say physics material. And I'm going to call this physics material bouncy. A physics material is simply a way to instruct the physics engine to work on our rigid bodies in a particular way. So, can I clarify why paddles are not affected by ceiling and floor? They're not going to be affected by ceiling and floor because we're not simulating them. We are literally setting their transform. If you look at paddle.cs, we are literally informing where we want this game object to be positioned on. We are not following through with a simulation. Whereas with ball, we are using a simulation because we have a rigid body and we're adding force to it.
I've just thought that because they had colliders and you also had a collider on your paddles, that it would collide.
You'll get notified of the collision, but it wouldn't prevent you from moving.
Gotcha.
Okay, so bouncy is a physics material. Remember, right-click, create physics material. All a physics material is a way to describe to the physics engine how we want things to work. So for this physics material, I'm going to give it a dynamic friction of 0 and a static friction of 0. I'm not going to go over all of these settings. All you need to know is we don't want any friction. However, we do want bounciness, which happens to be a property on the physics material itself. Bounciness goes between 0 and 1. So I'm going to set bounciness to 1. And that's really the only thing we need to do with this particular physics material. However, remember, I created this physics material inside of the project as an asset, but I did not associate it with any of my mesh colliders. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. To associate a physics material with a mesh collider, you click on a game object that contains a mesh collider. You go over to, or sorry, not mesh collider, but collider in general. You go over to the collider in the components window, in this case a box collider, and you set its material to what you just created. To set the material, you click on this little nondescript, ugly-looking target, weird, I don't know what that's trying to represent button on the right-hand side of the field, and that'll open up a little dialog that you can use to select the physics material that you want.
Or you can just drag and drop it onto the object in the hierarchy, and that'll do the same thing.
Yes, but I find this way more explicit for some reason. I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead and bouncy this. I'm going to go ahead and bouncy this. I'm going to go ahead and bouncy this. I want everything to be bouncy, including the ceiling and the floor.
Not the camera.
Yeah, not the camera. Okay, so now if I play...
Also, I believe...
Yes,
if you... Did that work? It looks like... No. That's interesting. You know how they were all like, we've fixed this whole thing, you can now do multiple objects at once. Not so much with adding colliders and things.
Okay, so now we have a Pong game with a small problem, and that's if we miss the paddle, the ball just continues to fly into space. So now we have to go ahead and create our walls. If I didn't add the bouncy physics simulation only to the ball itself, then the ball would slowly slow down. Think about any ball that you bounce. You bounce a ball on a floor, and eventually it's just going to slow down. If the floor was as bouncy as the ball itself, then it'll continue to bounce. Or at least that's the way that this physics simulation works. Again, I didn't want this to be a big tutorial about physics simulation, but it is necessary to do some certain things. And we will be getting back to colliders, especially once we start getting onto the main project. Yeah, the ball script is really just this. Two methods.
You gotta love Unity. I just think back to XNA 101 and doing the amount of work that was required to get that to happen.
Yeah, no kidding.
Don't worry about line endings being inconsistent. Unity likes to sometimes use Unix-style line endings, whereas Visual Studio obviously likes to use Windows-style line endings. Typically, you would want to instruct Visual Studio to normalize them should Visual Studio ever ask you to. Okay, so is everybody done with the ball script? Because there really isn't a whole lot of code to read with it.
Did you put the backstops in and I missed it?
Nope, that's the next. That's
to do that next.
the next and final thing, really.
You've got to put the colour in.
Why is my ball slowing down? Your ball will slow down substantially if you do not apply the bouncy physics material to the right paddle, the left paddle, the floor, and the ceiling. In addition, make sure that the bouncy physics material has friction set to 0. Otherwise, you will have friction, and obviously friction causes things to slow down.
And presumably, in answer to Iron Soul's question, you can have non-physically possible things like bounciness of more than one.
Actually, I think it does constrain bounciness between 1 and 0.
Ah. I suppose. Oh, that's annoying.
Yeah, you could probably do some fun stuff if you didn't have that constraint. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our walls in place. So what I'm going to do with the walls is I'm going to do the same thing I did before, where I'm going to create 2 game objects. And then I'm going to apply in the case of these guys, I'm going to apply a box collider and a rigid body to them so that they get informed of the collision. Words fail me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new empty, and I'm going to call this left wall. And then I'm going to put in some magic properties into the transform. That's going to simply be the X is going to be, again, I got these values by playing around with it and seeing based off where my camera was positioned. I did not want this to turn into a huge discussion about how to get game objects to work properly given an arbitrary resolution or camera location. I just wanted things to just work straightforwardly for this. So the position is -18, 0, and 12. The scale is 1, and then 30, and then 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and add, now remember, I have this still selected. Now I'm going to add a physics, I'm going to add a rigid body to it for the collision, and then I'm going to add a box collider to it for the collision. I'm not going to worry about giving it the bouncing material, because as we will see in a moment, the ball doesn't actually bounce off the walls. The ball gets reset if it goes to the walls. Now for the rigid body, I'm going to uncheck gravity and check this word I can't pronounce. And what this word means is it means that the simulation does not determine the position of the actual game object. Instead, we determine how that is positioned. If I did not have that,
you can't pronounce kinematic.
Kinematic. No, it's like a doubly for me. I used to not be able to pronounce anomaly. I don't know why.
It's like cinematic, but with a K.
Nah. Okay, so we checked.
And the sound of Nelson contemplating spelling and speaking.
Anyway, so we have this set up. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, Control D. Control D. And I'm going to shoot this one. I'm going to rename it to right wall. And I'm going to shoot it over to the right-hand side of our screen. So now X becomes 18. However, the only reasons that we have these left walls and right walls is so that we can detect when the ball collides with them. And when the ball collides with them, we want to reset the ball to the center of the screen. That means we need another script. So let's go ahead and go into our project, right-click on scripts, hit create, go down to C# script, and type in wall. Okay, so now I hit enter. And of course, our solution has been modified on the outside environment. Hit reload. I'm going to close wall out because it looks like ReSharper didn't pick it up. Now ReSharper did. And let's go ahead and implement wall. All wall is going to do, it's going to do two things. After I format it and nuke out all this cruft. Wall is going to have a public paddle side. It's going to have a give point to side field so that we can differentiate between the two different walls. Next, I'm going to say public void on COLLISION enter. See, I really despise the way that these are magic methods, because typically you'd be able to use autocomplete if they were an override or an interface implementation, but instead you have to type them out. And if you misspell that, well then tough luck, because you're not going to get any indication that you misspelled it. It's just not going to work. So this is another magic method that's going to be invoked when another rigid body or another collider collides with us. And the collision collider, or the collision parameter to this method will contain data about the collision that we can use to do whatever we need to do. What I'm going to do is say collision.gameObject. Collision.gameObject is the game object that collided with us. Then I'm going to do getComponent. I'm going to use the generic form of this method. As the generic parameter, I'm going to pass in the ball type. And then I'm going to do .reset. Finally, I'm going to go up and say debug.log blah.appoint. And that's going to be give point to side. The debug.log method is simply going to send a message to the console window of Unity. And so this is going to, because I don't have any logic for displaying the score, we're just going to log out to the log of who got a point. And then we're going to get the game object that collided with us. We're going to yank out his ball component, and then we're going to invoke the reset method on it. And the reset method, if you remember, is simply going to set the transform position back to 0 and add in force. So this is the entirety of the wall component. Remember to spell this right. You have to spell this right. You will have no indication that you spelled it wrong. It just won't work. So now I'm going to jump back into Unity and apply the wall script to do both of my walls. I'm going to drag it over to the left wall, and I'm going to drag it over to the right wall. For the left wall, I'm going to set the give point aside to right. Because if the ball hits past the left paddle, that means the right side gets a point. For the right wall, I'm going to set the give point aside to left. Because the ball gets past the right paddle, that means left gets a point. So now I'm going to open up my console window and hit run. So now you can see I can play a little game, I can collide with the paddles, and if I let it go through, it now says left got a point. But if I let it go through over here, it's going to eventually say right got a point.
Would it be fairly trivial to make it wait for, say, 1 second before putting the ball back?
That would involve coroutines, and I think I've fried everybody's head already.
Yeah, not.
Oh, would it?
Yeah,
Okay.
not quite yet.
Again, it's not a perfect game. There's a lot of stuff that you guys can do for tweaking, like this, the absolutely horrid, boring speed of the ball is actually really getting to me. Let's go ahead and say like 8.
You could turn it into Arkanoid.
Huh?
A nice little challenge for people who are feeling comfortable with this. Add some blocks in the middle that get destroyed when the ball touches them.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
And I would, as a fan of user manuals myself, Unity's reference on the web is very, very good. It is actually very, very good. It's clearly written, and it explains very concisely what you need to know from a reference viewpoint. It's probably not so good in terms of how do I do, where's the make a game button. It's not that, but it's good in terms of when you need to dig around inside it.
But the most important thing about tonight's intro lesson is just going through and getting a feel for the workflow and putting together a very basic interactive game. I mean, we've only been sitting here for just, a few hours, and there's been a lot of stuff discussed. And like I had said at the very beginning, I did not want us to rehash out the Unity fundamentals. As a matter of fact, Mike had asked a question just a little while back. It says, I have not watched any Unity BTMs or C#. Should I start with the Unity BTMs? Part of the homework that I had mentioned at the very beginning of this class tonight was to grab the Unity fundamental videos. They are freely available for download. I'll place the link once again over inside of BuzzNet. There they are. So grab those, download them, and at least watch through the basics. If you've already watched through all the basics, that's perfect. But there are people in the class that have not, and we are not going to rehash all of the elementary stuff just because it's already there. You could already start on that. So I highly recommend watching that. Also, for those of you that have never, ever coded before, please take a look at our C# 101 class. At least go through some of the beginning videos. And I can show you real quick where, or Nelson, you could do it for me. If you want to bring up a browser real fast, head on over to 3D Buzz. So this is just a real quick place until we get the new site complete, which will make all of the live class stuff an absolute breeze. No, not there. I was going to say go to forums.
Yep. There's a link he's going to.
There's a, go to member sponsor lounge.
Forums.
If you guys go to member sponsor lounge, you're going to see a sticky that is the second one down, live class / workshop videos, a stream repository. So if you click in there, this is all the live classes we've done so far, and you'll see links to everything. So I would highly recommend C# 101. and I'd at least watch through the first few sessions. It will be a huge help. And I hope that everybody that's in this class, those of you that are complete beginners, don't get scared off by what's been gone over tonight. You can do this. There's all sorts of resources that are available at your fingertips on 3D Buzz. Now, the number sponsor. Make use of this stuff.
And yeah, I was talking to Nelson earlier, and his stated aim with this class today, not this whole class, this class tonight, today, this morning, whatever time of day, was to have you guys walking out with a game. You've got the fundamental, well, you've got a full game. Pong there. The only thing that's not being done is actually reporting anything to the user. If you were to build it out, then there would be no record of scores showing. But you know, that's entirely playable there. And to show you just how, because okay, we're about 3 hours in, but most of that has been explaining and troubleshooting things. I think in terms of actual coding time, there's probably half an hour there, if that.
I don't think even that. Most of the I have like 3 CS files.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to make it sound more impressive.
Oh, what, you don't think
well,
my Pong...
seeing as Nelson, we had a really nice, pretty-looking game, and Nelson hasn't done it. I'm hurt.
But yeah, stuff and things.
He doesn't care.
So any questions that are coming in over on the questions panel? Also, if you want to take a look at those.
Null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object. That means that you don't have an object reference set to an instance of an object. That could mean that what is being collided with isn't a ball. That would lead this particular line to throw a null reference exception. Get component of type ball will only return a ball object if what was collided against was in fact a ball. Make sure that your wall script is only being applied to your walls and nothing else. Daniel, try restarting Unity if you are having difficulty managing the windows. Ball.cs error, unexpected symbol, rigid body. Are you...
What is this question? I'm not seeing these.
Unexpected symbol, rigid body. Are you sure that your code is inside the reset method?
Whose question was it?
Craig's.
Craig, where the hell? I can't... Where? What time?
8:01.
Oh, wow. Oh. It hasn't arrived. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's because it should be a capital B.
Are you sure? Because I'm looking at the code right now, and it's actually not a capital B.
Oh.
An unexpected symbol could mean... Oh, it could mean that you don't have a... Well, no, that would correctly identify that, wouldn't it? Oh, right, you're missing a semicolon. Make sure to put a semicolon at the end of the new vector 3. C# does require semicolons. Will we ever get around to messing with the other build options for iOS and Android? Not in this class, but the things that you learn in this class will be applicable to iOS and Android.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe deviating, but is there a way with WSD plus right click to move with constant speed? Seems I have to move with a gradual speed with it. I'm not sure what you're asking.
He means in the... No, he doesn't mean when you're playing. Yeah.
Like that?
In scene view. Yeah.
Oh, you mean go faster? Like I'm just hitting the shift key and I'm going faster. Okay.
Carl wants to see the ball code again.
Alright. And then am following along in MonoDevelop, and we'll do the C# 101. Is there a recommended version of Visual Studio? Yeah, the Visual Studio 2012 Ultimate release candidate. Do not worry about purchasing Visual Studio until 2012 comes out, because there's no need to. Really, because you can just use the RC, and it works very well.
Just use websites.
Or that. My code looks just like yours, but it says add force has no definition. Well, that's impossible. I mean, what's your code look like, Carl? Unity's giving me an error. All compiler errors have to be fixed. Yes, all compilers.
Should it be a capital F on force in add force?
It should be capital F.
Yes, it should. Well, he hasn't put a capital F.
Okay, well, that's the problem. Yep, yeah, I just saw the actual full error. Make sure it's a capital F. Be sure to get an IDE. An IDE fixes all these problems that everybody's talking about, like the inconsistent accessibility and the missing the semicolon and the F being wrong. Look how much easier it is with an IDE to identify these errors. First error. What's going on right here? Semicolon expected. Well, that was easy. Second error. What's this? Cannot resolve symbol add force. Whenever you see cannot resolve symbol add force, what you do is you open up the IntelliSense and you see, oh, wait a sec, there's add force, but I have the casing wrong. So investing in an IDE, and especially something like ReSharper, will save you time.
Or just generally being pedantic about spelling and grammar and actually ethics.
If you won't see any errors in Visual Studio sometimes. Hit Control-Shift-B. Doing a build inside of Visual Studio doesn't actually do anything other than force Visual Studio to show you all the errors and warnings that you might have. Because sometimes Visual Studio doesn't show you the errors until you do a build.
Yeah, first thing on your list, Craig. Very good. For those of you, remember sponsors now. Shoot off a PM to Zach about getting ReSharper. Basically, we've worked out a deal with JetBrains, and they've been letting us give students in the MMO class, but we'll just encompass this as well. Access to ReSharper for a year now. It's already started off. It's been renewed. A couple months ago?
I think it was the end of April.
Was it already that long ago? But yeah, but I'm sure they'll renew it for a third time, and we just pass out new code. So I would, it's not going to cost you anything to start using it and following along with the class and everything. I would take advantage of that, but you do have to PM Zach. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one thing I will warn you, because I am not one for jumping on bandwagons, as anyone who knows me around the site knows. I'm very much have my own opinions on things. There is a reason we pimp ReSharper at every opportunity we get. It will transform the way you write code. It will improve the way you write code. It will teach you how to write better code. And it will just make you a lot faster. It makes life easy. And it's wonderful. The warning being, if you try it out, be prepared to buy it eventually, because you will hate coding without it afterwards.
And Musaru, shh, don't be so loud, man. You're gonna get me busted. And Zach is, by the way, away at the moment. He took a week of vacation this week. That's why his classes have been, were never scheduled for this week. That's why there was this week gap. So he has been checking PMs and getting back to people, but it's not super fast. He gets back this weekend. But again, I would definitely throw the PM his way. And just say, Jason said to PM you. I won't ReSharper. Thank you. Say something nicer so we can probably get to you quicker. Who knows? ReSharper's what, $160 or so for the regular? Yeah, for the non-enterprise one. Worth every flipping penny.
Honestly, can't imagine coding without it.
That's right, Brian, and don't mention any haircut. Yeah, compliment his bike. That's very good, Ashley. That's very smart, actually.
All right.
So, real quick, any other questions over there, Nelson? That
Yeah, actually, I have a question. Am I the only person, when speed reading this code, repeatedly in his head thinks that this says saddle side?
Yes.
Yes.
That's actually been a problem
no.
with the questions. Like, I've been reading, it's like, why are they talking about saddles? And then I read it slower, and it's like, oh, it's paddle. That's really actually getting to me.
yeah.
I genuinely, see, you've lulled me into this sense of security. I genuinely thought we were going to get through a whole thing without talking about ponies.
Well, I doubt that's ever going to happen. Let's see. Are we going to use enums often? Well, yeah, we'll use them when they're appropriate.
Yeah, probably. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Enums are a category of type in .NET that are nice to use.
And Gavin, can you check these things off, please, over in the...
Yes, I'm trying to.
Also, will we work with GUI in this course? Yes, we will.
All right,
We're going through them in the order that they appear in the...
If I wanted to add a point variable for left and right paddles, would that be under paddle side? Still, wow. Something's wrong with my eyes.
Do it.
Paddle side enum, or would I have something, or would I do something like make a new enum called paddle score? I'm C++ guy mostly, so the C# is different. You wouldn't represent a paddle score with an enum. You would represent it with an integer. And you wouldn't place it necessarily on the paddles themselves. You would have some sort of tertiary component that handles the scoring and the game logic in a more overarching way. But you wouldn't use an enum for that. Enums are for it's a type that has a definite list of values. Obviously, if you wanted to represent a score with an enum, you would not want to sit there all day and type in 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. You would rather use something like an integer.
Somebody tell me why Webinar scrolls the opposite way on the mouse wheel to every other app in the planet.
I've never actually used a mouse wheel on that before. They might have been taking lessons from Apple, though.
Somebody did ask, will we work with GUI in this course? I would think that's a definite yes.
I answered that one a minute ago.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
What does random.range14 do in the ball class? Random.range is a random number between a range of constant values or specified values. So random range 1 through 4 will return a random number between 1 and 4.
So have you answered these up here? Because
I don't think I haven't hit Gabriel's question. Ball.cs, the name reset does not exist in the current context. I don't know. Ball.cs, name reset. Do you have a reset method on your ball.cs? I have another error line. Paddle direction is type, but is used like a variable. Remember,
that'll be
this.
You'll probably be using a paddle direction dot something.
Well, yeah, you want to do you want to do direction equals paddle direction dot up. But I am I mean, it depends on what Jason wants to do. But at this point, we have covered stuff.
I would suggest stopping the video here. Yeah. Well, covering anything else we need to cover for the video, and then covering these, because a lot of these are...
This is OpenOffice-y type stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the homework for this class is to build what I've built, essentially. That's it. Go ahead, put this together, get used to the editor, get used to working with scripts, get used to debugging scripts. Now, there's not a whole lot of scripts to work with, and they're all very short. So it would be a great experience as a great learning opportunity to learn how to debug these issues. Obviously, we will be here in the forums and in the open office hours to help, and a little bit of time after the video's over. So, to all the future people, that is the homework. Is there anything else, Jason or Gavin, that...
Gavin, don't you need to point them to how they need to go about handling homework?
Yeah, Nelson, do you want to do the usual, show them the thread and the...
All right, as far as homework
and
goes, homework will be posted in the live class calendar. So, for example, for this class, click on this and then click on the corresponding homework link that will appear when the thread is created. So every bit of homework will have a thread, and that thread will be attached to this particular item in the calendar when it is set up.
Do you want to go to the Member Sponsor Lounge and the master thread?
All right, there's this. All right, Gavin, take it away.
Go and read this thread. It is called Masterclass something or other. Go up to the top, please. Master Live Classes Homework Submission Steps. Read it, do what it says. If you don't do what it says, I will slap you. Oh, the people. People I get going, you haven't set up a Dropbox for me, and then it's because they haven't followed the instructions in this thread. So please follow these instructions. Homework is submitted by a Dropbox. You'll need a Dropbox account. There's a link there in this thread, and all you need to do is PM me your email that's associated with it via the site. There's a link to PM me there. I am Gavin Whitlock. Hit that and it'll open up a new PM thing. In the week one homework, there will be a deadline for Dropboxes. Oh, goodness. And a deadline for the homework. I can't really think of anything else to say. Other than that, once you will put your homework into the Dropbox, and that'll be it. Now, yes, there is one thing. Do you want submissions this week?
Well, yes.
Okay. Built games? Because, really, you've been through every line of code 12 times in the video.
Yeah, I would still like people, though, to submit it and to see if it even just works. I was thinking of just submitting the entire Unity project. What are your thoughts? Because you're the person who does that.
I'm okay with that, providing it's zipped and providing you do not put any textures, anything else that Nelson hasn't shown in the video into the Dropbox with it, because these files could get huge very quickly if you when you created your project added in all sorts of things like skyboxes and water and terrain textures, and I'm going to flat out say I will fail anyone who submits anything like that. If there's anything that isn't required by the scene that's in there, you will fail. Because my Dropbox will explode otherwise with this many people submitting. I will put full instructions on exactly what form to submit this in the thread for the homework, but essentially it will be a question of zip it up or rar it up or 7-zip it up and put it in the folder. That's all. I think.
Alrighty. So yeah. So is there anything else?
I just want to say I hope you guys really enjoyed the class. I'm really impressed with probably 80% of the people stayed with us all the way until the very end. Now, I know that we've got other questions that are coming in, but and you guys hang tight. Those questions are kind of like open office type questions. and we won't eat up a lot of video time for helping each person out individually. But I really do hope to see everyone continuing to come out for the Unity class and us progress into a 102 and a 103 and to get into some really, really cool stuff. I mean, with the private student that we've been working with, as far as game design and software engineering with use of Unity, we've done about 300 hours so far worth of stuff. It's quite insane. And I hope to be able to share both Nelson, myself, and Gavin all sorts of good stuff with you guys over the upcoming months. But as I said at the very beginning, please make sure you go out and take a look at the fundamental videos. And if you have no coding experience, please look at C# 101. You can just kind of fast forward through it. Just try to kind of pick up on what's going on. It'll make the class a lot easier.
And that's pretty much it. Use the forums. Use the C# forums. Ask questions. People are very helpful in the forums. And if they're not, we will slap them.
Exactly.
Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. And so that would be goodbye to all the future people. Bye.
That's
Goodbye,
right.
future people.
Goodbye, everyone.